My own sister poured gasoline over my locked car while I was trapped inside, just so her white husband could steal my $50 million company. As the fire licked the edges of the shattered glass, my mother leaned down, looked me dead in the eyes, and smirked. "When the flames die, so will every trace of you," she said. They walked away confident they had committed the perfect family murder. They had no idea I was about to orchestrate the most devastating resurrection they would ever witness. Before I share exactly how I dismantled their perfect lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to survive the very people who were supposed to protect you. I jolted awake to the acrid taste of toxic black smoke coating the back of my throat. My head throbbed with a blinding intensity, and for a few disorienting seconds my brain could not process why my body was tilted at a violent, unnatural angle. The world outside my Mercedes SUV was pitch black, save for the eerie, dancing orange glow illuminating the desolate ravine where my vehicle had been forced off the road. I tried to move to push myself up from the crushed steering column, but a sharp, agonizing pressure bit into my chest. My seatbelt was completely jammed, the locking mechanism crushed under the impact of the crash. Every frantic pull only tightened the nylon strap further against my collarbone, pinning me to the driver's seat like a trapped animal. I coughed, my lungs burning, as the thick smoke began to fill the enclosed cabin. I turned my head toward the driver's side window, which had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces of safety glass, expecting to see a rescue crew or at least a concerned passing driver. Instead, through the fractured glass and the rising curtain of smoke, I saw her. Kendra, my older sister, stood barely 10 feet away on the muddy embankment. She was not crying. She was not calling for help. With a terrifyingly calm and casual flick of her wrist, she tossed an empty red gasoline can into the dirt ditch. The heavy thud of the plastic container hitting the ground echoed through the quiet night, freezing the blood in my veins. My own sister had just doused my car in fuel. Standing right beside her was Preston, her husband. While I was suffocating on toxic fumes, bleeding and fighting for my life, Preston was casually adjusting the expensive tailored cuffs of his designer suit. Not a single hair on his head was out of place. He looked exactly as he always did at our family Sunday dinners, pristine, arrogant, and utterly unbothered by the destruction around him. He did not look like a man who had just participated in running his sister-in-law off a deserted road. He looked like a man who had just closed a lucrative business deal. My throat was too raw to scream, and the smoke was thickening so rapidly I could barely draw enough breath to whisper. I watched them in paralyzed horror, my mind frantically trying to make sense of the nightmare. Then their voices drifted through the shattered window, carrying over the crackling sounds of the growing fire. "I swear my hand is completely cramped," Preston complained, rubbing his right wrist with a theatrical sigh. "Do you have any idea how exhausting it was to perfectly forge her signature on all those CEO transition documents? The legal paperwork for a $50 million supply chain company does not just sign itself. We had to make sure the board of directors would not suspect a single thing when I take over Melanin Crown on Monday morning." The words hit me harder than the physical impact of the crash. Melanin Crown was my life. I had built that natural hair care empire from nothing, pouring my soul into every formula, every marketing campaign, every distribution deal. I had spent my entire 20s working out of a poorly ventilated garage, mixing organic oils and shea butter, while my family looked down on me. Preston was not just a bystander in my attempted murder. He was the architect of a hostile corporate takeover. He had forged my signature to steal my $50 million company, and my own sister had helped him coordinate the execution. A third figure stepped into the orange light of the fire, her expensive church shoes sinking into the mud. It was Bernadette, my mother. I felt a desperate, naive surge of hope. Surely my mother would stop this. Surely she would scream for them to pull me out. But as she moved closer to the burning vehicle, the expression on her face contained no horror, no grief, and absolutely no love. "Stop whining about your hand, Preston," Bernadette snapped, swatting the air as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "You got what you wanted. Kendra should have been the CEO of that company from the very beginning anyway. She actually earned her master's degree. She married a successful white man who understands corporate structure. She did not embarrass this family in front of our entire congregation by dropping out of Spelman College to mix cheap hair grease in a dirty garage. Her words sliced through the suffocating heat of the cabin. My mother was standing over my impending funeral pyre, still criticizing my life choices. She had always worshipped status and appearances. To her, Kendra and Preston represented the polished upper-class success story she could brag about at church luncheons. My grassroots hustle, the relentless grinding it took to turn a garage operation into an international brand catering to Black women, had always been an embarrassment to her, until it became worth $50 million. Then it became a prize to be stolen and handed to the daughter she actually respected. The heat inside the car was becoming unbearable. The flames, originally concentrated near the hood, suddenly breached the dashboard. A wave of blistering heat washed over my face, and the plastic paneling of the console began to melt and drip like dark, toxic rain. The fire was spreading fast, licking at the toes of my leather boots. My lungs felt as though they were filled with crushed glass. I was running out of oxygen, and I was running out of time. When the flames die, so will every trace of you. Bernadette sneered, leaning down so her face was illuminated by the destructive glow. She looked me dead in the eyes, her expression devoid of any maternal instinct. You were always a stubborn, difficult child, Maya. Now you can finally be useful to this family. Enjoy the fire. She turned her back, linking arms with Kendra and Preston. The three of them began walking up the steep embankment, leaving me to burn alive in the twisted metal cage of my own success. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of their departure ignited something deep within my chest. It was a survival instinct fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. I refused to die in this ditch. I refused to let Preston sit in my executive chair. I refused to let my mother and sister inherit the empire I bled to build. I stopped pulling uselessly at the jammed seatbelt. Instead, I twisted my torso as violently as I could, ignoring the searing pain radiating through my ribs. The front of the cabin was rapidly turning into an inferno, the windshield cracking under the intense thermal pressure. I kicked out wildly, my heavy boots smashing against the driver's side door, but the crushed metal frame would not budge an inch. The smoke was blinding now, stinging my eyes and suffocating my screams. I arched my back, contorting my leg awkwardly toward the floorboards. When I had purchased this specific model of the Mercedes SUV, the dealership had highlighted a strange, almost paranoid safety feature, an emergency trunk release cable routed beneath the rear floor mats. I stretched my leg as far back as my trapped upper body would allow, my calf muscles screaming in protest. The flames from the dashboard leaped higher, singeing the fabric of my jeans. My boot scraped blindly across the floor carpet, searching for the raised ridge of the hidden compartment. I kicked away the heavy all-weather mat, coughing violently as the toxic smoke displaced the last remaining pockets of clean air. My toe caught on a plastic latch. I hooked my heel under the edge of the panel and pulled back with every ounce of strength I had left. The emergency release cable snapped tight. A loud mechanical clank echoed from the rear of the vehicle. The trunk had popped open. The mechanical clank of the trunk releasing was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The heavy rear door swung upward on its hydraulic hinges, letting in a rush of cold, fresh night air that instantly clashed with the suffocating heat of the cabin. The sudden influx of oxygen fed the flames, licking at the dashboard, causing the fire to surge violently toward the ceiling. I had mere seconds before the entire front half of the vehicle was consumed. With the cabin filling with fresh air, I took one massive, desperate breath and focused all my remaining energy on the jammed seatbelt mechanism. My fingers were slick with my own blood and sweat. I grabbed the heavy metal buckle of the belt and slammed it repeatedly against the sharp, jagged edge of the crushed center console. 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes. The thick plastic housing of the buckle finally cracked the internal spring mechanism, snapping under the sheer force of my desperation. The nylon strap released its deadly grip on my chest. I scrambled backward over the center console, ignoring the searing heat that blistered the skin on my left shoulder. I tumbled into the rear passenger area, kicking frantically at the headrests as I dragged my battered body toward the open trunk. The leather seats behind me were already catching fire, filling the back of the SUV with an overwhelming, blinding heat. I threw myself out of the open trunk, tumbling head over heels into the cold, wet mud of the ravine, just as a deafening explosion ripped through the night air. The engine block had finally given way. The shockwave of the blast threw me violently backward, sending me rolling down the steep, brush-covered embankment into the thick, dark woods. I crashed through thorny bushes and wet foliage, my body absorbing the punishing blows, until I finally came to a halt at the base of an ancient oak tree. I lay there in the freezing mud, gasping for breath, my vision blurring as the intense heat of the explosion washed over the tree line. Every nerve ending in my body was screaming in agony. My left shoulder felt as though it had been roasted alive, and my ribs throbbed with a dull, sickening pain with every breath I took. From the safety of the dark shadows, I forced my eyes open and looked up toward the road. The Mercedes was now a towering inferno of bright orange and yellow flames illuminating the desolate stretch of highway. Standing near the guardrail, safely distanced from the heat, were the three people I had trusted most in this world. My mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law. They had not left yet. They were staying to watch the show to ensure the job was done. And then the performance began. Through the quiet night air, I heard the wail of police sirens approaching in the distance. Instantly, the cruel, calculating demeanor of my family vanished, replaced by an Oscar-worthy display of hysteria. I watched in absolute disgust as my mother Bernadette dropped to her knees in the dirt, clutching her chest and wailing loudly. She cried out my name, her voice cracking with manufactured, devastating grief. Kendra collapsed against Preston, burying her face in his pristine suit jacket, her shoulders shaking with fake sobs. Preston, ever the meticulous actor, was holding his phone to his ear, running his free hand through his perfectly styled hair to make himself appear frantic and disheveled. I could hear his voice carrying down the ravine, shouting into the phone for the dispatcher to hurry, claiming that a tragic accident had just occurred, that his beloved sister-in-law had lost control of her vehicle and plunged into the ditch. He sounded breathless, devastated, completely broken by the tragedy. He was practicing his grieving brother-in-law, face in the reflection of his phone screen, making sure every angle conveyed the perfect amount of shock and sorrow. I pressed my body flat against the damp earth, the cold mud offering a minor soothing relief to the severe burns on my skin. My immediate instinct was to stand up, to stumble up the hill and flag down the approaching police cruisers. I wanted to scream the truth, to point a bloody finger at the three monsters standing by the guardrail. But a chilling realization froze me in place. Preston frequently golfed with the local police captain. He donated heavily to the precinct charity funds, using money from my own company. If I emerged from these woods right now, injured, hysterical, and accusing a respected, wealthy white businessman of attempted murder, he would simply claim the crash had caused me to suffer a severe brain injury. He would use his connections to have me quietly institutionalized, or worse, he would ensure I suffered a tragic medical complication on the way to the hospital. I could not fight them in the light. They controlled the narrative. They held the forged power of attorney. They had the social standing my mother had ruthlessly cultivated in our community. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to dismantle their lives with the same absolute devastation they had just unleashed upon mine, I had to let them believe they had won. I had to let Maya Washington burn to ashes in that ravine. With trembling, bloodied fingers, I reached into the deep pocket of my tactical cargo pants. Miraculously, my burner phone was still intact. Its screen cracked, but functional. This was the encrypted phone connected directly to the hidden cloud storage of my car. Dashcam, a security measure I had installed months ago when I first suspected corporate espionage within Mellon and Crown. I ignored the screaming pain in my shoulder and dialed the only number I knew by heart. The phone rang twice before a deep, sharp voice answered. "Maya, it is 2 in this morning." Malik sounded groggy but alert, his lawyer instincts never fully asleep. Malik and I had met during our freshman year at Howard University. He was ruthless, brilliant, and fiercely loyal. As my corporate attorney, he had helped me structure every major contract that built my $50 million empire. He was the only person in the world who knew about the hidden safety nets I had woven into the fabric of my company. Malik. I whispered, my voice, a raspy, smoke-damaged croak. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not interrupt. I am officially dead. The line went dead silent. The sleep instantly vanished from his voice. Where are you? What happened? Preston and Kendra just ran me off the road. They dumped gasoline on the car and lit it on fire. My mother watched them do it. I am in the woods off Route 9. The police are pulling up to the wreck right now. I cannot go to them, Malik. Preston owns the captain here. They forged my signature on the CEO transition documents. They are making their move. I could hear Malik moving quickly, the sound of keys jingling and a door slamming. I am tracking your phone location right now. Stay hidden. Do not move. I am coming to get you. I am pulling up the live dashcam feed from your cloud server right now. I have got it all, Maya. I have the video of him pouring the gas. I have your mother talking. I have everything. Secure it. I ordered, coughing up a wad of dark soot. Copy it to 3 separate offline drives. Let them take the bait. Let them think the company is theirs. I will be there in 20 minutes. Malik said, his voice cold and terrifyingly calm. Stay alive, Maya. I ended the call and buried the phone deep in my pocket. Through the trees, I watched the flashing red and blue lights of the emergency vehicles illuminate the smoke-filled sky. Firefighters rushed down the embankment, spraying foam over the charred, unrecognizable skeleton of my vehicle. I watched a paramedic wrap a thick, warm blanket around my mother's shoulders as she wept convincingly into a tissue. She was playing the role of the devastated matriarch, perfectly accepting the condolences of the very officers who were supposed to protect people like me. I closed my eyes and let the darkness of the woods swallow me whole, feeling the heat of the fire slowly fade away, replaced by the freezing, calculating chill of impending vengeance. 2 hours later, I was bundled in the back of Malik's tinted sedan, driving miles away from the wreckage. He had found me shivering near a drainage pipe, barely clinging to consciousness. Without asking questions, he had thrown his expensive trench coat over my burned shoulders and carried me to his car. We bypassed every local hospital, driving 2 counties over to a private burn clinic run by a former client of his, a doctor who understood the value of absolute discretion and off-the-record cash payments. By the time the morning sun began to rise, I was lying in a sterile white hospital bed under a completely fabricated alias. My left shoulder, arm, and the side of my neck were heavily bandaged, treated for second-degree burns. The painkillers coursed through my veins, dulling the physical agony, but doing nothing to quiet the raging storm in my mind. The television mounted in the corner of the room was tuned to the local morning news. I stared blankly at the screen as the breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom. Local black beauty mogul Maya Washington presumed dead in tragic car fire. The news anchor spoke with practiced solemnity, detailing the horrific late-night crash that had claimed the life of one of the city's most prominent young entrepreneurs. The broadcast cut to live footage from outside my mother's sprawling suburban home. Bernadette was standing on the front porch, flanked by Kendra and Preston. She wore a perfectly tailored black morning dress, dabbing at her dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Maya was a beautiful soul, my mother told the cluster of reporters, her voice trembling with expertly feigned emotion. She was so passionate about her business, but the pressure was overwhelming for her. She had been struggling recently, behaving erratically. We tried to get her help, but tragedy struck before we could save her. Our family is completely devastated. I watched my mother lay the groundwork for their defense, painting me as an unstable, overwhelmed woman whose tragic death was an unfortunate accident waiting to happen. Beside her, Kendra nodded solemnly, wiping away a non-existent tear, while Preston looked somberly at the ground, playing the strong, supportive pillar of the family. The door to my hospital room opened quietly and Malik stepped inside. He had not slept. He was wearing the same clothes from the night before, holding a sleek black tablet in his hands. He pulled a chair up to the side of my bed and sat down, his face a mask of furious concentration. The police found the body of a stray animal, completely incinerated in the trunk of your car, Malik said, keeping his voice low. The fire burned so hot it destroyed the DNA integrity. Because the vehicle was registered to you and your family provided statements claiming you were driving home alone, the coroner is rushing the presumptive death certificate to avoid media scrutiny. As far as the state is concerned, Maya Washington died in that fire. Let them believe it, I said, my voice hoarse. What is Preston doing? Malik tapped the screen of his tablet, pulling up a series of live banking feeds and corporate calendar schedules. He has not wasted a single minute. Preston just scheduled an emergency board meeting for Monday morning at the Melanin Crown headquarters. He is using the forged power of attorney documents to assume immediate unilateral control of the company. Your mother is scheduled to speak at the meeting to back up his claims. He looked up from the screen, his dark eyes locking onto mine. He thinks he won Maya. He thinks he just inherited a $50 million empire. What is the play? I leaned back against the stark white hospital pillows, ignoring the dull, throbbing pain radiating from my burns. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. Let him hold the meeting, I said. Let him take the CEO chair. Let him transfer the funds. I want him to commit federal wire fraud in front of the entire board of directors. He thinks he stole my empire. He has no idea I left him holding a live grenade. Let him pull the pin. The metal latch gave way with a sharp crack that vibrated up my shin. The heavy rear liftgate swung upward, and a rush of freezing night air slammed into the cabin, feeding the fire instantly. I did not hesitate. I threw myself over the bumper, tumbling blindly into the freezing mud of the ravine. My knees hit the wet earth hard, and I scrambled backward, clawing at the dirt and thorny brush to put distance between myself and the vehicle. I only made it about 10 yards before the engine block gave out. The explosion was deafening. A massive shockwave picked me up and threw me further down into the dense wooded brush. The sheer force of it knocked the breath completely out of my lungs, leaving me gasping in the damp soil. Searing heat washed over my back and left shoulder, radiating a blinding agony that made my vision swim. I bit down hard on my lower lip to swallow the scream tearing up my throat. The taste of copper flooded my mouth. I lay there shivering in the mud while the towering inferno consumed the last of my Mercedes. I forced my eyes open, blinking away the ash and dirt. Through the thick tangle of bare branches and rising smoke, I had a clear view of the ridge above. They had not moved. My mother Bernadette, my sister Kendra, and my white brother-in-law Preston stood silhouetted against the roaring orange flames. They were perfectly safe, perfectly calm, and utterly devoid of humanity. I watched in a paralyzed state of shock as Preston casually brushed a speck of soot from the lapel of his custom suit. He pulled out his smartphone, the screen glowing brightly in the dark, and began to actively practice his devastated face. He contorted his features, dropping his jaw, slightly widening his eyes, and running a hand frantically through his perfectly styled hair. He looked like an actor preparing for an audition rather than a man who had just orchestrated the murder of his wife's sister. Kendra was no better. My older sister, the woman who used to braid my hair before church when we were little girls, was currently checking her reflection in the darkened window of Preston's parked sedan. She adjusted the collar of her silk blouse, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. She did not shed a single tear for the sister burning to ashes just a few feet away. She was securing her inheritance, ensuring she looked presentable for the cameras that would inevitably arrive. Bernadette stood between them, watching the flames devour my life, with a look of profound satisfaction. She had always worshipped proximity to white wealth, and Preston was her golden ticket. For years she had criticized my natural hair, my dark skin, my grassroots hustle, calling my $50 million empire a ghetto garage project. Now she was handing my legacy to a man who had never worked a hard day in his life, simply because he fit her twisted aesthetic of success. Preston gave a sharp nod, signaling that rehearsal was over. It was time for the performance. He handed his phone to Bernadette. I watched my mother dial 911, and the transformation was instantaneous. The cold, calculating woman vanished entirely, replaced by a hysterical, grieving mother. Her voice pierced the quiet night, echoing down into the ravine with terrifying authenticity. "Help us, please, somebody! Help us!" She wailed into the receiver, her tone cracking with manufactured devastation. "My daughter is trapped." We were driving behind her and she swerved off the road. "The car is on fire and we cannot get the doors open. Please, you have to send the fire department right now. Please tell me my baby is going to be okay." The performance was flawless. If I had not just watched them toss the gasoline can into the ditch, I would have believed her myself. Kendra collapsed against Preston, burying her face in his chest while he wrapped a comforting arm around her shoulders, acting the part of the strong, protective husband holding his shattered family together. They had rehearsed this. Every movement, every sob, every frantic gesture had been planned with absolute precision to ensure they walked away with my company and zero suspicion. In the distance, the faint but unmistakable wail of police sirens pierced the night air. The sound triggered an automatic instinct in my brain. My first thought was to stand up to push through the burning pain in my shoulder and stumble up the embankment. I wanted to wave my bloodied arms, flag down the arriving patrol cars, and point directly at the three monsters standing by the guardrail. I wanted them in handcuffs immediately. I planted my hands in the mud, preparing to push myself upright, but I froze. A sharp, chilling realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. Preston was not just a wealthy corporate raider. He was deeply embedded in the local power structure. He played golf every Sunday at the country club with Captain Jenkins, the head of the local police precinct. He donated heavily to the police benevolent fund, using money siphoned directly from my company accounts. If I crawled out of these woods right now looking like a delirious, hysterical burn victim, accusing a respected white businessman of attempted murder, I would not find justice. I would find a target on my back. Preston would smoothly take control of the narrative. He would tell the officers that the trauma of the crash had caused me to suffer a severe brain injury and that I was hallucinating. He would insist on riding in the ambulance with me to ensure my safety. And I knew with absolute certainty that if Preston got into the back of an ambulance with me, I would suffer a tragic, fatal medical complication before we ever reached the hospital doors. I could not fight them in the light. They controlled the narrative, the money, and the authorities. To beat them, I had to let them believe they had won. I had to let Maya Washington burn to ashes in that ravine. I lowered my body back into the damp earth, hiding completely within the shadows of the thick brush. My hand slipped into the deep pocket of my tactical cargo pants. My fingers wrapped around the cold, hard plastic of my burner phone. It was completely intact. 3 months ago, when I first noticed discrepancies in the corporate ledger and caught Preston snooping through my office, I had installed a hidden dashcam in my vehicle that uploaded directly to a secure private cloud server. This burner phone was the only device with the encryption key to access those files. I pulled the phone from my pocket and powered it on. The screen cast a faint blue glow in the darkness, highlighting the mud and blood coating my hands. I had the footage. I had the audio of Bernadette telling me to die. I had the proof of their conspiracy. I shoved the phone deep back into my pocket, gripping it like a lifeline. Above me, the red and blue flashing lights of the first responding police cruisers began to illuminate the tree line. I heard the slam of car doors and the frantic shouts of officers rushing toward the burning wreckage. I turned my back to the flashing lights, gritted my teeth against the searing agony in my shoulder, and began to limp deeper into the pitch-black woods, letting the darkness swallow me whole. I pressed the cracked burner phone to my ear, my hand trembling so violently I could barely hold the device against my cheek. The cold mud of the ravine seeped through my torn clothes, chilling me to the bone, but it was nothing compared to the ice running through my veins. The line rang twice before he answered. I did not have to wait for Malik to wake up. He was a corporate attorney who thrived on the relentless grind, a man who treated sleep as a luxury we simply could not afford. We had survived the cutthroat halls of Howard University together, and we had built the legal framework of melanin crowns side by side. He was not just my lawyer, he was my absolute shield. I told him exactly what happened. I did not waste time crying. I recounted the crash, the gasoline Preston adjusting his cuffs, and my mother smiling as she condemned me to burn. Within seconds, Malik shifted from my best friend to a cold, calculating tactician. He did not panic. He did not ask useless questions about how I felt. He simply ordered me to stay low, stay in the shadows, and keep breathing. Less than 40 minutes later, the heavy tires of his black SUV crunched against the gravel on the shoulder of the highway, safely parked a mile away from the swarm of police cruisers investigating my burning car. I limped out of the dense tree line, clutching my ribs every step, sending a fresh wave of agony through my scorched left shoulder. Malik took one look at my charred clothes and blistered skin, stripped off his expensive cashmere overcoat, and threw it gently over my shivering frame. He loaded me into the back seat and sped off into the night. As we crossed state lines, the quiet hum of the engine was the only sound in the car. Malik was already working his network, making encrypted calls to contacts who operated strictly in the gray areas of the law. By the time the sun began to threaten the horizon, he had secured a room at a highly exclusive private burn clinic 2 states away. It was a facility designed for politicians, high-profile executives, and people who required absolute, unquestionable discretion. I was wheeled through a back entrance and checked in under a completely fabricated identity. The next few hours were a blur of blinding pain and sterile white lights. A team of silent nurses scrubbed the soot and mud from my wounds, applying soothing burn creams and heavy bandages to my shoulder, neck, and arm. They asked no questions about the nature of my injuries and demanded no official identification. The heavy dose of painkillers they pumped into my intravenous line dulled the physical agony, but the medication was entirely useless against the furious storm raging in my mind. When morning fully broke, illuminating the sterile blinds of my private hospital room, Malik sat in the corner chair, his fingers flying across the keyboard of his laptop. I lay propped up against the crisp pillows and stared straight ahead at the television mounted on the wall. The local morning news was broadcasting live, and the breaking news banner scrolling across the bottom of the screen confirmed my new reality. Local black beauty mogul Maya Washington presumed dead in tragic car fire. The broadcast cut to a press conference being held outside the local police precinct. There, standing behind a cluster of microphones and bathed in the flashing lights of press cameras, was my family. Bernadette stood center stage wearing a perfectly tailored black morning dress that she must have purchased weeks in advance. She dabbed at her completely dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the devastated matriarch with sickening perfection. Maya was a beautiful soul, my mother told the reporters, her voice trembling with expertly feigned grief. She was incredibly passionate about her brand, but the pressure of the industry was simply overwhelming for her. She had been struggling recently, behaving so erratically. We tried desperately to get her help, to get her to step back and rest, but tragedy struck before we could save her. Our entire family is completely devastated. I gripped the edge of my hospital blanket, my knuckles turning white. It was a masterclass in character assassination, masquerading as maternal sorrow. My mother was laying the psychological groundwork to justify exactly why I was dead. She was painting me as an unstable, overwhelmed woman who had finally cracked under the pressure of running a massive corporation. She was telling the world that my death was an inevitable tragedy, ensuring no one would question a simple car accident. Beside her, Kendra leaned into the microphones. My sister wore no makeup, her hair pulled back to emphasize her fake distress. "I always had to clean up Maya messes," Kendra said softly, looking down at the ground. "Even when we were children, she was so impulsive. I just wish she had listened to us when we told her to hand over the business operations to someone more capable. I was the one who helped her with the business formulas anyway. I just wish I could have done more." They were erasing me. In real time on live television, they were rewriting my history, stealing my credibility, and preparing to steal my fortune. Preston stood slightly behind them, looking somber and strong, the perfect supportive husband, ready to step in and save the day. The heavy wooden door to my room clicked shut. Malik stood up from his chair and walked over to my bed. He did not look at the television screen. Instead, he handed me his sleek tablet. The screen displayed a live, highly encrypted feed of the Melanin Crown internal corporate network. The firewall I had paid millions to construct was currently flagging massive internal access requests. Preston is not wasting a single minute of his fake grief, Malik said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I have been monitoring the executive server logs. 10 minutes ago, Preston bypassed the standard emergency protocols and scheduled an emergency board of directors meeting for Monday morning. He submitted the forged power of attorney documents and the fake executive succession papers directly into the corporate registry. I stared at the digital footprint of my brother-in-law, agreed. He was moving faster than even I had anticipated. He is demanding an immediate board vote to assume unilateral control of Melanin Crown. Malik continued, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the data. He is going to use your mother and your sister to testify to your supposed mental decline. He wants the keys to the kingdom before the coroner even finishes processing the empty ash in your car. Malik crossed his arms and looked down at me. They think they buried you in that ditch, Maya. What is the play? I leaned back against the pillows, ignoring the searing pain radiating across my bandaged collarbone. I looked at the television where my family was still putting on the performance of a lifetime, and then I looked down at the tablet displaying Preston digging his own grave. Let him hold the meeting, I said, my voice cold and steady. Let him stand in front of my board of directors. Let him submit those forged documents on the official record. Let him take the bait. Monday morning arrived with the harsh glare of fluorescent hospital lights and the steady, rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. My body was wrapped in sterile white bandages, my skin burning with a dull, relentless agony, but my mind had never been sharper. Malik sat in the corner of my private room, a steaming cup of black coffee in one hand and his encrypted tablet in the other. He tapped the screen twice and handed me a small wireless earpiece. The audio feed was crystal clear. Malik had slipped into the Melanin Crown headquarters late Sunday night and planted a microscopic listening device directly under the polished mahogany table of the executive boardroom. I closed my eyes and listened as the heavy boardroom doors swung shut. The muffled shifting of leather chairs and the low murmur of my board of directors filled my ear. Then came the sound of papers being shuffled into perfectly neat stacks. Preston cleared his throat. His voice echoed through the room, smooth, practiced, and dripping with a manufactured sorrow that made my stomach churn. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Preston began, his tone dropping an octave to convey the perfect amount of grief. As you all know, this weekend, our family suffered an unimaginable tragedy. We lost Maya. We are all still reeling, but Maya was a woman of action. She would not want us sitting around weeping while the empire she built stalls. She would want us to protect her legacy. I could practically see him adjusting his perfectly tailored suit, commanding the room with his unearned confidence. He slid the forged documents across the table. That is why I am presenting these documents today, Preston continued. These are emergency succession directives and a legally binding power of attorney signed by Maya just last month. In the event of her untimely passing or incapacitation, Maya designated me to step in as acting chief executive officer of Melanin Crown. The boardroom erupted into immediate chaotic crosstalk. Marcus Vance, my lead investor, and one of the few people who knew exactly how much I despised my brother-in-law, slammed his hand flat against the table. The sharp crack echoed through the earpiece. With all due respect to your loss, Preston Marcus said, his voice thick with absolute disbelief. This makes zero sense. Maya kept a tight grip on this company. She explicitly restricted your access to the logistical frameworks and the primary vendor accounts. She never trusted you with the supply chain. Why on earth would she quietly hand over the entire corporate structure to you without breathing a single word of this to the board? Preston stammered. The smooth facade cracked for a fraction of a second. I heard him shuffle the papers, nervously scrambling for a corporate excuse. But he did not have to find one. The heavy boardroom doors opened again, and the sound of my mother weeping filled the room. Bernadette weaponized her grief like a loaded gun. I listened from my hospital bed as she moved into the room, her voice shaking breath, hitching in that perfect theatrical way she had perfected over decades of manipulating our church congregation. "Please, Marcus," Bernadette sobbed, her voice trembling with the weight of a shattered black mother. "Please do not interrogate my son-in-law. He is only doing what my baby girl begged him to do." The entire boardroom fell completely silent. No one was going to argue with a grieving mother who had just lost her child in a fiery crash. Bernadette knew exactly what she was doing. Maya was not the strong, invincible woman she pretended to be in front of all of you, Bernadette said, her voice dropping into a dramatic, tearful whisper. The pressure of running this massive company was destroying her mind. She was mentally breaking down. She came to my house crying, telling me she could not handle the stress anymore. She told me she was drowning and that she needed Preston to take the reins so she could finally rest. She hid her mental instability from the board because she was terrified you would pull your investments. She was broken, Marcus. She begged Preston to save her company. I gripped the crisp hospital sheets with my uninjured hand, my fingernails digging into the fabric. The sheer audacity of her lies was breathtaking. I had never gone to her for comfort. I had never once complained about the pressure. I thrived under the pressure. Melanin Crown was my lifeblood. But Bernadette was painting me as a fragile, hysterical woman who needed a strong, capable white man to save her from her own ambition. She was systematically assassinating my character to validate their theft. Before Marcus or anyone else could formulate a response to that emotional ambush, Kendra chimed in. My older sister spoke with a crisp, arrogant authority, completely devoid of the tears she had faked for the news cameras. "My mother is telling the truth," Kendra announced. Maya was spiraling. "And let us be completely honest about how this company was built. Maya was a fantastic marketer, yes. She was a beautiful face for the brand. But who do you think actually formulated the original chemical compounds? Who do you think sat up late nights balancing the spreadsheets while Maya was playing influencer on social media? I have a master's degree in business administration. I practically ran the back end of Melanin Crown from the shadows to protect her ego. Preston and I are the only ones equipped to keep this company afloat now that she is gone." I turned my head and looked at Malik. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle ticked in his cheek. Kendra had never mixed a single batch of product in her life. When I was covered in shea butter and essential oils sleeping on the concrete floor of a freezing garage, Kendra was out buying designer shoes with our mother credit cards. She had never balanced a spreadsheet for me. She had actively mocked my dream right up until the moment it became profitable. Now, she was stealing my origin story and claiming it as her own. The emotional manipulation was absolute perfection. Cornered by the incredibly convincing forged legal documents, the hysterical tears of a grieving mother, and the bold claims of the older sister, the board of directors folded. They were businessmen. They hated bad optics. Denying the final wishes of a dead woman while her grieving family stood weeping in the boardroom would have been a public relations nightmare. I heard Marcus sigh heavily, the sound of defeat rushing through the microphone. Fine, Marcus conceded, his voice tight with reluctance. The signatures appear legally binding. We will initiate a formal review of the documents, but for the sake of continuity and to prevent panic among our shareholders, the board recognizes Preston as acting CEO of Melanin Crown effective immediately. May God rest her soul. The meeting adjourned. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor and footsteps filtering out of the room confirmed the trap was set. Preston had the keys to the castle. I pulled the earpiece out and tossed it onto the tray table. Malik was already typing furiously on his laptop, bringing up the live backdoor banking feeds he had established before the crash. He watched the screen, his dark eyes tracking the incoming data packets. "They are celebrating right now," Malik said, his voice deadly calm. "But they have no idea what you actually built." We waited in silence. The hospital room was completely still, save for the hum of the air conditioning. I counted the seconds in my head. I knew exactly who Preston was. I knew his greed could not be contained, not even for a day. He would not wait for the ink to dry. He would not wait for the formal review. He wanted his prize immediately. Exactly 10 minutes after the boardroom doors closed, Malik's tablet emitted a sharp, high-pitched ping. The screen flashed bright red with an urgent security alert. Malik smiled, a cold, predatory grin spreading across his face. He turned the tablet around so I could see the screen. Preston just logged into the primary corporate treasury account using his new executive credentials, Malik announced. He bypassed the standard secondary authorization protocols and initiated a massive wire transfer. He just moved $5 million of Melanin Crown liquid capital into an offshore shell entity registered under his own name. He had not even been CEO for 15 minutes, and he had already committed federal wire fraud. He thought he was draining my life work. He thought he had just secured his fortune and won the game. He thought he was robbing a dead woman. I leaned back against my pillows, a dark sense of satisfaction washing over the searing pain of my burns. Let him steal it, I said, staring at the flashing red numbers on the tablet. He just signed his own death warrant. Malik's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard, the harsh blue light of the screen reflecting in the lenses of his glasses. We were watching the digital footprint of a massive brazen theft in real time. Through the hidden micro camera Malik had discreetly installed behind the expansive bookshelf in my executive office, just hours before I watched Preston settle into my custom leather chair. He kicked his expensive Italian shoes up onto my polished mahogany desk, the very desk I had purchased after clearing my first $1 million in revenue. A sickeningly smug grin stretched across his face as he watched the progress bar on his own laptop screen inch closer to 100%. The $5 million wire transfer to his offshore account in the Cayman Islands had just cleared. Preston actually threw his head back and laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that vibrated through the audio bugs secured in my ear. He reached into the mini fridge I kept stocked for high-profile client meetings, pulled out a bottle of vintage champagne and popped the cork right there over my imported rug. He poured the bubbling liquid into one of my crystal glasses, raising it in a mock toast to the empty room. He truly believed he had just drained my life's work, outsmarted a woman he deemed entirely beneath him, and secured his fortune for the rest of his life. He looked exactly like a man who had conquered the world and gotten away with murder. I watched him take a long, arrogant sip of the champagne. Then I turned my head slowly toward Malik, ignoring the tight pulling sensation across my heavily bandaged shoulders. Malik was staring at his screen, his jaw clenched so tightly, a vein throbbed visibly in his neck. He was waiting for me to give the order to freeze the account, to call the federal authorities to stop the money before it vanished completely into the labyrinth of international banking. I reached out with my uninjured hand and gently pushed his laptop screen down a few inches. I looked him dead in the eyes and smiled, a cold, calculated expression that made Malik pause. I told him to let the money go. Malik looked at me as if the smoke inhalation from the crash had finally damaged my brain. He reminded me that $5 million was the entirety of the liquid operating capital for Melanin Crown. He warned me that Preston was bleeding the company dry in front of our eyes. I took a slow, painful breath and finally let Malik in on the secret I'd been carrying for a quarter of a year. I told Malik to access the state business registry and look up a private entity called Onyx Crown Holdings. As Malik typed the name into the encrypted database, I took him back to a family dinner 3 months ago. It was a typical Sunday afternoon at my mother's sprawling house in the suburbs. The air was thick with the smell of roasted chicken and the suffocating weight of my family's relentless passive aggression. I had excused myself from the table to take a call from a major international distributor and stepped into my mother's home office for some quiet. That is when I caught Preston. He was hunched over my unlocked briefcase, frantically taking pictures of my private financial ledgers and product formula sheets with his smartphone. When I cleared my throat, he jumped nearly a foot in the air, stammering some pathetic excuse about looking for a pen to write down a sports score. He tried to laugh it off, flashing that privileged, entitled smile, assuming I was too naive to understand what I was looking at. He thought I was just a girl who mixed hair products, completely incapable of recognizing blatant corporate espionage. I did not yell. I did not confront him or cause a scene at the dining room table. I simply smiled, handed him a pen, and walked back to finish my dinner. But the exact moment I left that house, I went to war. For the past 90 days, while my family thought I was overwhelmed by the pressure of running a beauty empire, I was meticulously and legally dismantling it from the inside out. I hired a specialized shadow legal team based out of Delaware, completely independent of my usual corporate counsel, to ensure no one in my immediate circle would catch wind of my moves. I quietly transferred every single piece of intellectual property, every proprietary organic formula, and every exclusive vendor contract out of Melanin Crown. I moved the manufacturing rights, the real estate deeds for our storage warehouses, and the massive distribution agreements into Onyx Crown Holdings, a completely hidden ironclad holding company where I was the sole uncontested managing director. I stripped Melanin Crown down to the absolute studs. I left the shiny logo, the expensive downtown office space, and a carefully calculated chunk of decoy cash in the primary accounts, just enough to keep the board of directors completely oblivious and to bait a greedy rat like Preston. Malik stared at his screen as the Delaware corporate records loaded, his eyes widening in absolute shock as he read through the complex legal filings. He looked back at the hidden camera feed where Preston was now pouring himself a second glass of champagne, completely oblivious to his own impending destruction. Melanin Crown was nothing but a hollow shell. It was a ghost ship, sailing entirely on the fumes of past success. Preston had not stolen my empire. He had stolen a worthless corporate entity, saddled with expensive commercial leases, massive payroll obligations, and zero actual assets. I watched Preston wipe a drop of champagne from his chin, feeling a profound, chilling sense of satisfaction deep in my bones. By moving that $5 million across international borders using forged succession documents, Preston had just committed federal wire fraud to steal money from a company that essentially owned nothing of value. The FBI would not even need to build a complex, multi-year case against him. He had executed the illegal transfer on the company's monitored network, logged in under his own name, creating an undeniable permanent digital trail that led directly to his illegal offshore accounts. The mandatory minimum sentence for the financial crimes he had committed in the last 15 minutes would ensure he spent the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary. He was popping champagne and admiring his reflection in my office windows, but he was already a dead man walking. Malik let out a low, disbelieving laugh, shaking his head as he fully grasped the sheer magnitude of the trap I had laid for my family. He leaned back in his chair, a rare look of profound respect crossing his face. He told me I was the most terrifying client he had ever represented, and coming from a man who regularly battled ruthless corporate raiders in court, it was the highest compliment I could possibly receive. We watched Preston on the monitor for another moment, enjoying the intense, dramatic irony of his solitary celebration. The plan was entirely flawless. We just needed to wait for him to inevitably crash the hollow company into the ground when the suppliers refused his calls, and then the federal authorities would sweep in to clean up the wreckage. I closed my eyes, finally allowing myself to relax against the crisp hospital pillows, ready to let the heavy pain medication do its job so my burns could begin to heal. But my brief moment of quiet triumph was violently interrupted. A sharp, piercing alarm echoed through the quiet hospital room, startling me awake. It was not a medical monitor or a nurse call button. It was coming directly from Malik's sleek black tablet. The screen flashed with a high-priority red-level security alert that immediately cut off the video feed from my executive office. Malik snatched the tablet off the tray table, his fingers flying across the glass screen as he traced the origin of the blaring alarm. His brow furrowed in deep confusion, and then his expression darkened into something far more dangerous and urgent. He turned the screen toward me, the harsh red light illuminating the sterile white walls of my hospital room. The alert was not coming from the Melanin Crown corporate network or any of our business servers. It was a direct emergency notification from the private security system at my personal bank in downtown Atlanta. My heart hammered violently against my bruised ribs as I read the text scrolling across the screen. Preston was not the only one making a move today. While he was busy draining the corporate accounts, my sister had decided to secure her own piece of the pie before my ashes were even cold. The security alert detailed an active unauthorized intrusion protocol currently underway in the bank's subterranean vault. Kendra was standing in the highly secure safe deposit room. According to the live security logs Malik was pulling up, she had bypassed the first layer of bank security by presenting the branch manager with my falsified death certificate and a fraudulent court order naming her the sole executor of my personal estate. But she had hit a secondary biometric firewall on the box itself that she could not bypass with fake paperwork. Instead of walking away and trying again later, my elegant, supposedly sophisticated older sister had hired a shady private locksmith to bring heavy industrial equipment into the bank. Right at this very second, while Preston was drinking my champagne, Kendra was actively attempting to drill into my personal safe deposit box. She was not looking for corporate documents or cash. She was trying to steal the only thing in this world I valued more than my company. She was going after our late grandmother's antique jewelry. Kendra had always hated that our grandmother left her vintage emerald and gold jewelry set to me. Bernadette had tried to contest that will too, claiming I was too young and irresponsible to safeguard such valuable pieces. But the jewelry was not just expensive. It was the only pure thing in our family lineage, the only inheritance completely untouched by my mother's greed. Now Kendra was using my supposed fiery death to finally steal the one family heirloom I cherished. Malik's tablet displayed a live, highly encrypted feed from the bank's biometric security interface. I had paid top-tier fees for a premier account at the Atlanta First Fidelity Trust. The secure deposit boxes in their subterranean vault were equipped with localized cameras that activated upon any failed biometric entry or manual override attempt. Through the crisp fisheye lens of the security feed, I saw my sister. Kendra was wearing a tasteful black morning dress, holding a designer tissue to her perfectly contoured face. Beside her stood the branch manager, looking deeply uncomfortable but compliant, holding a piece of paper that had to be the forged death certificate and the fraudulent executor paperwork. Behind them stood a burly man in gray overalls, dropping a heavy canvas bag onto the polished marble floor. A private locksmith. Kendra had actually hired a shady contractor to drill through the titanium lock of my vault. I did not hesitate. I reached across the hospital bed and snatched the tablet from Malik's hands. I logged into the primary administrative portal using my master passcode and facial recognition. The interface loaded immediately, displaying a pulsing orange warning over box 714 indicating a manual breach attempt. I navigated swiftly to the emergency countermeasures menu. There was an option for a soft decline, which would simply deny the locksmith access and prompt the manager to ask them to leave. And then there was the hard protocol, a remote lockdown designed specifically for active hostile robbery attempts. I tapped the hard protocol. Inside the vault in Atlanta, absolute chaos erupted. The silent feed on the tablet suddenly engaged the audio channel as the bank's internal alarm system activated. A deafening mechanical siren blared through the marble room. The heavy titanium vault doors automatically engaged their emergency deadbolts with a loud metallic slam, instantly trapping Kendra, the branch manager, and the locksmith inside the reinforced room. Red strobe lights began flashing rapidly from the ceiling. The branch manager dropped the fake death certificate, his face draining of all color as he stared in horror at his own tablet. It was displaying a massive federal fraud alert. Kendra panicked. Her carefully constructed facade of elegant mourning vanished entirely. She shrieked, grabbing the branch manager by the lapels of his suit, demanding he open the doors immediately. The locksmith took one look at the flashing red lights, put his hands in the air, and backed away from my sister as if she were radioactive. He knew exactly what an active fraud lockdown meant. Because the bank catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy, their security systems were directly linked to the Atlanta Police Department. It took less than 4 minutes for heavily armed officers to breach the main lobby and force the branch manager's staff to manually override the vault doors from the outside. I watched as 3 police officers stormed into the secure room, their hands resting cautiously on their holstered weapons. They demanded identification and immediate explanations. The branch manager pointed a trembling finger directly at Kendra, frantically explaining that the global security system had just flagged her documents as part of an active identity theft and wire fraud operation. Cornered, trapped in a concrete box, and facing a very real threat of federal prison, Kendra did the only thing she knew how to do. She performed. She collapsed to her knees on the cold marble floor. She buried her face in her hands and began to wail. It was a guttural, dramatic sound perfectly engineered to evoke maximum sympathy. She sobbed hysterically about my tragic, fiery death. She cried that she was just a heartbroken sister trying to retrieve a beloved family heirloom to wear to my funeral so she could feel close to me one last time. She claimed she had absolutely no idea the power of attorney paperwork Preston gave her was unverified, acting as though she were a confused, grief-stricken victim of administrative error. The police officers shifted uncomfortably. Law enforcement was rarely trained to handle the hysterical grief of a wealthy, sobbing woman in a high-end banking facility. Her performance worked well enough to keep the handcuffs off her wrists, but the bank manager was taking no chances with his prestigious clientele. The police confiscated the forged documents, seized the locksmith tools as evidence, and ordered my sister to vacate the premises immediately. The security camera captured every agonizing second of her public humiliation. 2 police officers escorted Kendra out of the vault and marched her directly through the massive crowded lobby of the bank. Dozens of Atlanta elites stopped their lucrative transactions to stare at her. Her makeup was running in dark streaks down her cheeks, her designer morning dress was rumpled, and she was leaving completely empty-handed. She had tried to rob a ghost, and the ghost had locked her in a cage. I handed the tablet back to Malik, sinking slowly into the hospital mattress. A deep, genuine smile broke across my face, pulling tightly at the burn scars on my neck. I felt absolutely nothing but pure, unadulterated satisfaction. The rest of the week passed in a grueling blur of intense physical therapy and strategic corporate planning. The burn clinic staff pushed me to my absolute limits, forcing me to stretch the damaged tissue and regain full mobility in my left arm. The physical pain was blinding, a constant radiant fire that rivaled the accident itself. But I fed on it. I used the agony to fuel my focus. I refused to let my mother, my sister, or my brother-in-law take one single breath of peace. By Friday morning, my heavy bandages had been reduced to discreet, tight medical dressings that I could easily hide beneath long sleeves. I was sitting by the window reviewing the offshore account logs Malik had successfully traced when the heavy door to my room swung open. Malik walked in. His usual calm, collected demeanor was entirely replaced by a sharp, highly focused intensity. He was holding a thick black envelope sealed with dark gold wax. He walked straight over to my bed and handed it to me without a word. I broke the wax seal and pulled out a heavy piece of custom cardstock. The embossed gold lettering caught the morning light filtering through the blinds. It was a highly exclusive VIP invitation. Melanin Crown cordially invites you to a memorial and relaunch gala. Preston is not just taking over the company, Malik said, his voice hard and uncompromising. I intercepted this from the courier delivery heading to Marcus Vance's office. Preston is throwing a massive gala next Friday night at the Grand Plaza Hotel. He is billing it to the public as a tribute to your life, but the fine print details a complete corporate restructuring. He is going to announce his new vision to your top investors, your international distributors, and the beauty press. He is actively trying to erase your entire brand identity and replace it with a cheaper mass-market line using your capital to fund it. I stared at the gold lettering on the card, Memorial and Relaunch. Preston was going to stand in front of my investors, pretend to mourn me, and then unveil the absolute destruction of everything I had built with my own 2 hands. He wanted to wipe Maya Washington off the face of the earth and dance on my grave while cashing my checks. The dull ache in my shoulder vanished completely, consumed by a massive rush of pure adrenaline. I looked up at Malik. I did not ask for his legal opinion. I did not ask the clinic staff if I was medically cleared to leave the facility. I planted my hands flat on the mattress and pushed myself forward, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. My bare feet hit the cold linoleum floor. I ignored the tight, screaming protest of my healing skin. I stood up straight, rolling my shoulders back. "Order me a custom dress, Malik," I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority in the quiet room. "It is time for a resurrection." Malik stepped out into the hospital corridor to make the encrypted calls necessary to secure a custom designer gown under a fake name. While he was gone, I pulled his tablet back onto my lap. The adrenaline from the gala invitation was still burning through my veins, temporarily masking the throbbing pain in my shoulder. I had cut off Preston and humiliated Kendra, but a massive question still lingered in my mind. Preston was arrogant, but he was not a hacker. He could forge signatures on a piece of paper, but uploading them directly into the Melanin Crown Executive Registry required a master digital clearance token. My system utilized military-grade two-factor authentication. Only 3 people in the entire world possessed a physical master token. I had one. Malik had the second. I opened the central server access logs and filtered the data by the exact hour Preston had uploaded his fake succession documents. The screen populated with lines of green code, and there it was. The digital footprint was undeniable. The credentials belonged to Chloe. Chloe was my vice president of operations. 2 years ago, she was a brilliant, hardworking logistics coordinator drowning in an $80,000 predatory student loan cycle. Her credit was completely destroyed, and she was facing eviction. I did not just hire her. I paid off her entire debt with a single check from my personal account. I mentored her, elevated her to the executive suite, and trusted her with the keys to my kingdom. Now her digital signature was sitting right next to the documents that authorized the theft of my company. Malik walked back into the room, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. I did not say a word. I simply turned the tablet around so he could see the screen. His expression hardened instantly. He walked over, took the device, and initiated a deep diagnostic dive into Chloe Company email server. It took him less than 3 minutes to bypass her deleted folder and pull up a chain of heavily encrypted messages between my vice president and my older sister. The payoff was laid out in plain text. Kendra had promised Chloe the deed to my downtown luxury penthouse. My sister had negotiated the sale of a $10 million piece of real estate she did not even own, all in exchange for a plastic security token. I read the messages where Chloe complained about my demanding work hours, and Kendra validated her, calling me a tyrannical boss who did not appreciate true talent. They had bonded over their shared resentment of my success, convincing themselves that they deserved everything I had built. I did not scream. I did not throw the tablet across the room. Anger is an undisciplined emotion, and I needed absolute precision. "Where is she right now?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of inflection. Malik ran a trace on the GPS signal of Chloe Company-issued smartphone. "She is at Le Petit Chateau in Midtown," he replied. "She is having a late celebration lunch with Kendra." "Perfect," I said. "Activate the diagnostic microphone on Chloe phone." Malik typed a rapid sequence of commands. A moment later, the ambient noise of a high-end 5-star restaurant filled my quiet hospital room. I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses, the soft murmur of wealthy patrons, and the distinct irritating sound of my sister laughing. "It is going to be so much better with you running the operations," Kendra was saying, her voice muffled but clear through the phone microphone. Maya was always so rigid. "Once Preston officially announces the relaunch at the gala, we can completely redesign the packaging. And do not worry about the penthouse, Chloe. The moment the probate lawyers clear the estate, I am transferring the deed straight to your LLC." "I cannot wait to redecorate that living room," Chloe replied, her voice dripping with unearned arrogance. Maya had terrible taste in furniture. I placed my uninjured hand flat against the tablet screen. I logged into the primary Melanin Crown administrative dashboard. With a few swift, deliberate keystrokes, I located Chloe employee profile. I did not just suspend her access, I executed a total digital termination. I revoked her security clearances, deleted her email accounts, and severed her connection to the company mainframe. Finally, I navigated to our corporate merchant account. I highlighted the platinum corporate credit card issued in Chloe, name zeroed out the balance limit, and permanently canceled the account. Let us see how much they enjoy lunch, I murmured. Through the audio feed, we listened as the waiter approached their table. He politely informed them that the bill came to $580. Kendra scoffed a sound of pure entitlement and told Chloe she would cover it. I heard the unmistakable zip of a zipper as Kendra pulled out her wallet and handed over her personal platinum card. A minute passed. The waiter returned, his voice tight with professional discomfort. "I apologize, ma'am, but your card has been declined." Kendra gasped indignantly. "That is impossible. Try it again. The machine must be broken. Do you know who I am?" "It is not the machine," the waiter insisted gently. "Your bank has placed a hard freeze on the account." I smiled. The federal fraud alert I had triggered at the bank that morning had done its job perfectly. The authorities had locked down every single financial asset attached to Kendra's name. She was functionally bankrupt. "Just put it on the company card," Chloe said smoothly, trying to save her new best friend from public embarrassment. "I have a $50,000 limit." She handed the card to the waiter. 2 minutes later, the waiter returned, but this time he was not alone. The heavy, authoritative footsteps of the restaurant manager echoed through the audio feed. "Ladies," the manager said, his voice cold and commanding, "not only has this corporate card been declined, but the merchant service has flagged it as unauthorized and requested that we confiscate it immediately. I have also been informed about the incident at the bank this morning involving you, Miss Washington. We do not tolerate fraud at this establishment." "You cannot speak to me this way!" Kendra shrieked, her voice pitching into that hysterical grieving sister routine she had utilized in the bank vault. "My sister just died in a tragic fire. We are mourning. We are executives at Melanin Crown." "You are attempting to steal from my restaurant," the manager fired back, completely unfazed by her tears. "I do not care about your titles. You have consumed nearly $600 worth of food and champagne with absolutely no means to pay for it. You have exactly two choices. I can call the police right now and have you both arrested for theft of services, which will look fantastic on the evening news alongside your bank fraud allegations. Or you can walk through those double doors into my kitchen and scrub every pot, pan, and dish until this bill is worked off." Kendra gasped, the sound choking in her throat. "You want me to wash dishes? I am wearing a $2,000 dress." "Then roll up your sleeves," the manager replied sharply. "The police are on speed dial. Choose now." I listened to the sound of rapid, panicked breathing. Chloe was completely silent, the terrifying reality of her situation finally settling in. Her corporate safety net was gone. The company card was dead. She had betrayed me for a penthouse she would never see, and now she was about to face federal authorities if she did not comply. "Fine," Kendra hissed, her voice shaking with absolute humiliation. "Show us to the kitchen." As the sound of their footsteps retreated toward the back of the restaurant, Chloe's voice broke the silence, panicked and breathless. "Kendra," she whispered. "The card was canceled. Not declined, canceled. Preston told us he had full control of the accounts. If the accounts are dead, that means Preston does not actually control the money. Something is deeply wrong." I tapped the screen, cutting the audio feed, severing their panicked realization from my hospital room. The trap had sprung flawlessly. Preston was ruling over a corporate graveyard, Kendra was scrubbing grease off frying pans in a designer morning dress, and Chloe was officially unemployed. They thought they had buried me, but they had simply handed me the shovel to bury them instead. The satisfaction of watching Chloe and Kendra wash dishes was a sweet appetizer, but the main course was still preparing itself in my executive boardroom. While Malik finalized the details for my custom gown, I kept my eyes locked on the digital dashboard of Melanin Crown. Preston was moving fast, driven by a toxic combination of unearned arrogance and absolute panic. He had a gala to host in less than a week, and he needed product to show off his grand relaunch. He needed to prove to the board and the press that he was a visionary. But visions require capital, and thanks to my shadow maneuvers, the primary corporate accounts were running on fumes. To fund his massive relaunch, Preston had to cut corners, and he went straight for the heart of the company. I opened the product development files he had just uploaded to the shared server. My blood ran cold as I read through the revised chemical breakdowns. Melanin Crown was built on a promise to Black women. I had spent years sourcing the highest grade ethically harvested shea butter from Ghana pure Moroccan argan oil and organic honey. Our formulas were sacred. They healed textured hair, protected it, and nourished it. Preston was completely gutting those formulas. He had authorized the removal of every single premium organic ingredient. In their place, he was substituting cheap petroleum derivatives, harsh sulfates, synthetic parabens, and liquid plastics. He was transforming premium hair care into toxic sludge designed to maximize profit margins while actively destroying the hair of the women who trusted us. He truly believed our core African American consumer base was stupid enough to buy a shiny label without reading the ingredient list. He was going to slap my logo on a product that would cause chemical breakage, and he was going to do it to save 70 cents per unit. I felt a cold, calculated fury settle into my chest. I opened a secondary window on my tablet, bypassing the Melanin Crown servers entirely, and logged directly into the global freight forwarding portal under the Onyx Crown Master account. Because I had secretly transferred all the vendor and shipping contracts to my holding company weeks ago, I still maintained absolute uncontested control over the physical supply chain. Preston was completely blind to this. He had just wired the last of the decoy funds to an international chemical supplier to expedite 4 massive cargo containers of his cheap synthetic filler materials. The shipment had just cleared customs at the port of Savannah and was being loaded onto commercial freight trucks bound for my Atlanta manufacturing plant. He needed those chemicals churning in the mixing vats by midnight to meet his production quota for the gala. I pulled up the digital bills of lading. The interface displayed the GPS tracking beacons for all 4 freight trucks idling at the port. My fingers flew across the glass screen. I selected the master route manifest. I highlighted the Atlanta destination code and hit delete. I needed a destination that would completely paralyze him. I typed in the routing code for a deep freeze commercial storage facility located in Anchorage, Alaska. When the system prompted me for authorization to reroute international freight, I took a moment to appreciate the sheer power resting at my fingertips. I scanned my fingerprint. The screen flashed green. Reroute confirmed. I sat back and watched the digital maps update in real time. The logistics software automatically issued new mandatory directives to the freight drivers. Instead of heading north from Savannah to Atlanta, those 4 trucks were now contractually obligated to begin a grueling multi-day journey across the continent. They would have to drive through the Midwest, navigate the treacherous mountain passes of the Pacific Northwest, and finally be loaded onto a commercial barge bound for the frozen Alaskan tundra. The beautiful irony was that Preston cheap synthetic chemical slurry was highly sensitive to rapid temperature drops. By the time those barrels reached Anchorage, the sub-zero climate would freeze the liquid solid. The harsh freezing process would cause the synthetic chemical binders to separate permanently from the mineral oils. The entire multi-million-dollar shipment would be rendered completely toxic, structurally ruined, and entirely unusable even if he managed to pay the exorbitant fees to ship it back down south. I also thought about the factory in Atlanta. The massive stainless steel mixing vats had been thoroughly sanitized and prepped for a continuous 72-hour production run. Hundreds of factory floor workers, line managers, and quality control inspectors were currently standing on the clock, receiving double overtime pay, waiting for raw materials that would never arrive. Preston was hemorrhaging tens of thousands of dollars by the hour paying for a completely dead factory. By 5 o'clock that evening, the reality of the situation crashed down on Preston. I tapped my earpiece, tuning into the hidden audio bug I had installed in the executive boardroom. The sound of pacing filled my ear, heavy, frantic footsteps echoing across the hardwood floor. Preston was hyperventilating. The sharp ringing of a cell phone cut through the audio feed. Preston snatched it up, his voice cracking with panic as he barked into the receiver. He had called Kendra. "Where is Chloe?" Preston screamed, completely abandoning his polished Ivy League corporate persona. He sounded like a man drowning. "The factory floor manager just called me. The trucks never arrived." The logistics portal says the freight is currently driving through Nebraska. I need Chloe to log in and fix the routing codes right now. I do not know where she is, Kendra shrieked back through the phone speaker. Her voice was shrill, tinged with the lingering hysteria of her humiliating afternoon. She had just spent the last 3 hours standing over a steaming industrial sink scrubbing baked-on grease off frying pans while wearing a ruined $2,000 morning dress. She ran out the back door of the restaurant crying the second the manager let us leave. Her company card is dead. My personal card is dead. The bank locked every single one of my accounts. You told me you had the finances secured. You told me you controlled the company money. I do control the company, Preston roared, slamming his fist against the mahogany boardroom table. The impact made the audio feed spike sharply. But the supply chain is completely locked down. Chloe was supposed to manage the freight transfers, find her, drag her back to the office, and get her on a computer. If those raw materials do not hit the vats by tomorrow morning, there is no new product line for the gala. I have investors flying in from London and Dubai. If I have nothing to show them, they will pull their backing and eat me alive. You are a complete idiot, Kendra screamed, her voice echoing violently through the high-ceilinged room. You stroll into a beauty empire built by Black women and think you can just swap out the organic ingredients like you are making cheap dish soap. You do not know the first thing about this demographic. You do not know how to run a Black-owned business, and you clearly do not know how to manage a logistics pipeline. You are a privileged, arrogant fool playing with my inheritance. Your inheritance, Preston spat back, his voice dripping with pure venom and deeply rooted resentment. You are nothing but a parasite living off your dead sister name. You could not even manage to steal a simple necklace from a bank vault without getting the police called on you, leaving me to clean up your mess. Do not you dare lecture me about business strategy when you are completely useless to this operation. The phone line went dead with a sharp click as Kendra hung up on him. Preston let out a guttural scream of frustration, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy glass tumbler shattering against the boardroom wall. I sat in the quiet sterility of my hospital room, listening to the shards of glass raining down on the floorboards. The cracks in their perfect, opportunistic marriage were no longer just hairline fractures. They were turning into massive, unbridgeable canyons. Preston and Kendra were turning on each other like starving animals in a cage, tearing themselves apart, while I sat comfortably in the shadows holding the only key. The supply chain was dead. The corporate accounts were frozen. The tension was reaching a boiling point, and the gala was only days away. I closed my eyes, resting my head against the cool glass of the hospital window, ready to plan the final execution. The shattered glass in the boardroom was only the beginning of Preston's unraveling. Without the raw materials to produce his cheapened formula, he was staring down a catastrophic product shortage just days before the highly publicized relaunch gala. Instead of taking accountability, contacting the freight forwarders with a level head, or delaying the event to sort out his supply chain, his sheer arrogance took the wheel. He decided he needed to control the narrative. He was going to get ahead of the inevitable leaks by issuing a preemptive corporate press release. Bypassing the entire public relations team, Preston sat down at his computer, completely convinced that his Ivy League business degree made him an undisputed master of crisis communication. I watched the text of his statement populate on Malik's mirrored server, and a cold, razor-sharp laugh escaped my lips. Preston had just handed me the match to burn him alive. The press release was a masterclass in corporate suicide. He addressed our fiercely loyal customer base with sterile, condescending jargon. He claimed the delayed shipments were due to a massive, long overdue upgrade in our ingredient profile. He stated that Melon & Crown was pivoting away from niche, unrefined elements to embrace a more universal, manageable standard of beauty. He actually typed the words taming unruly textures and moving beyond outdated cultural limits. When our top brand ambassadors, a tight-knit network of influential Black beauty creators who had spent years championing my original organic line, flooded his inbox with frantic emails demanding an explanation, his responses were even worse. He told these powerful women that their concerns were emotional rather than analytical and that they simply needed to embrace the new sophisticated corporate direction. The internet reaction was instantaneous, explosive, and violently unforgiving. Within 2 hours of the press release going live, screenshots of his patronizing emails and his tone-deaf corporate buzzwords flooded every social media platform. Top influencers posted scathing, tear-down video essays dissecting every racist undertone and corporate dog whistle Preston had carelessly typed. The hashtag boycott melanin crown became the #1 trending topic worldwide by Saturday evening. Millions of women who had trusted my brand to protect, heal, and nourish their crowns were now posting videos of themselves pouring his existing stock down the drain and throwing their bottles into the trash. They understood exactly what they were looking at. A white corporate raider had hijacked a beloved black-owned business and was actively stripping away its soul to sell cheap synthetic garbage. The fierce brand loyalty I had spent a decade cultivating morphed into a digital firing squad, and Preston was tied directly to the post. While Preston was being digitally immolated, my mother was preparing for her favorite weekly performance. Sunday morning service at the New Covenant megachurch was Bernadette's personal red carpet. For years, she had paraded through those massive heavy oak doors, wearing expensive custom hats paid for by my dividends, soaking up the admiration of the 5,000-member congregation as the proud mother of the famous Maya Washington. She viewed the church not as a place of worship, but as the ultimate theater for her social supremacy. But this Sunday, the atmosphere inside the sprawling sanctuary was glacial. The congregation was overwhelmingly composed of the exact demographic Preston had just deeply insulted. Women sitting in the pews were actively scrolling through the boycott videos on their phones as Bernadette strutted down the center aisle, expecting her usual chorus of compliments and fawning smiles. Instead, she was met with hard stares, crossed arms, and absolute suffocating silence. The tension finally snapped during the post-service fellowship hour in the church banquet hall. The pastor's wife, a highly respected community leader, who had sworn by my deep conditioning masks for 5 years, loudly confronted Bernadette near the coffee station. She held up her smartphone displaying Preston's statement and demanded to know why Bernadette was allowing her son-in-law to dismantle a monumental piece of Black excellence. Cornered, panicking, and desperate to protect her flawless image of control, my mother made a fatal miscalculation. She actually defended him. Bernadette raised her chin, adjusted her designer silk scarf, and loudly declared that Preston was a brilliant businessman who was simply modernizing my legacy for a global market. She called the congregation small-minded, accusing them of overreacting to a few words because they did not understand high-level corporate finance. The backlash was swift, loud, and absolutely merciless. The women of New Covenant did not just argue with her, they verbally dismantled her right there in the fellowship hall. They called her a sellout. They called her a greedy opportunist who was happily letting an arrogant outsider desecrate her own daughter's life work just to keep her luxury lifestyle funded. They pointed out the sickening hypocrisy of her standing in a Black church, wearing clothes bought with Black dollars, while fiercely defending a man who had just called their natural hair unrefined. The humiliation was total and absolute. Women who had worshipped her social status only yesterday were now turning their backs and walking away in open disgust. The whispers and shouts grew so heated that the pastor had to intervene respectfully but firmly, asking Bernadette to leave the premises to restore the peace. In less than 15 minutes, the social kingdom my mother valued above her own flesh and blood was reduced to smoking ash. She was a pariah permanently exiled from the only community that had ever made her feel important. I listened through Malik's intercepted audio feeds as Bernadette slammed the heavy door of her luxury SUV in the church parking lot. She was sobbing uncontrollably, the sound of her jagged, desperate breathing echoing through the quiet car interior. She hammered Preston's number into her phone touchscreen, dialing him in a state of absolute frantic despair. When he finally answered, she did not even say hello. She just started screaming. She begged him to issue a public retraction immediately. She ordered him to fire the PR team, to post a video apology, to do whatever it took to fix this massive cultural catastrophe. before the gala on Friday ruined them both entirely. She cried that she could never show her face in Atlanta high society again, that her reputation was completely destroyed. But Preston was not listening to a single word of her hysterical breakdown. Through the boardroom security bug, I could hear his ragged, uneven breathing. He was sitting completely alone at my heavy mahogany desk. He was not speaking. He was not typing. He was just staring dead ahead at his glowing computer monitor, his jaw locked, his hands trembling violently against the wood grain. Preston was not listening to a single word of Bernadette sobbing through the phone speaker. He was entirely paralyzed, his eyes locked onto the glowing computer monitor in his dark executive office. His jaw trembled and a thick bead of cold sweat rolled down his temple. He was staring directly at his own damnation. Sitting in my hospital room across the city, I watched the delivery receipts populate on Malik's encrypted tablet. We had timed the digital strike perfectly. It was Thursday night, less than 24 hours before the memorial and relaunch gala. Preston was already backed into a corner, asphyxiating under the weight of a frozen supply chain and a massive cultural boycott. His mental defenses were completely stripped. It was the absolute perfect moment to drop the guillotine. The email we sent was completely anonymous, routed through a dozen international proxy servers to mask its origin. I had addressed it to Preston Executive Inbox, Kendra Private Account, and Bernadette Personal Tablet simultaneously. The subject line contained only 4 words: "Fire reveals the truth." There was no text in the body of the email. There was no ransom demand, no list of grievances, and no explicit threat. There was only a single high-definition image attachment. 2 days after my accident, while the police and insurance investigators were still waiting for the wreckage of my imported SUV to cool down in the city impound lot, Malik had paid a very quiet, very expensive visit to the lot manager. My vehicle was equipped with a state-of-the-art reinforced dashcam system. The exterior cameras had melted in the blaze, but the digital black box secured deep within the titanium casing of the dashboard had survived. Malik retrieved the micro SD card before the authorities even knew to look for it. The image attached to the email was a raw, unedited screenshot pulled directly from that recovered footage. It showed the immediate aftermath of my crash. The frame was stark and terrifying. It captured Preston stepping out of the shadows, walking past the crushed driver's side door where I was trapped and bleeding. It showed him walking to the rear of the vehicle and retrieving the red emergency gasoline can from the trunk. But the most damning detail was the lighting. The screenshot was perfectly timed to catch the reflection of the growing flames dancing in Preston widened manic eyes as he unscrewed the cap of the fuel can. It was undeniable high-resolution proof that my husband did not just flee a tragic accident, he had actively fueled my attempted murder. Through the audio bug in the boardroom, I listened as Preston's breathing turned into short, ragged gasps. He dropped his phone onto the desk, completely ignoring Bernadette, who was still screaming about her ruined social standing at the megachurch. Preston stumbled backward, his chair rolling away and crashing into the credenza. He grabbed his hair, pacing the length of the room like a trapped animal. Someone knew, someone had the footage, someone was watching him. Across the city, the email landed in Kendra's inbox. I could picture my older sister standing in the kitchen of her leased townhouse, still nursing her bruised ego from the dishwashing incident at the restaurant. I knew exactly how her mind worked. Kendra had always known Preston left me in that car to die. They had planned to let the company fall into her hands by taking advantage of a fatal crash. But seeing the visual evidence of Preston pouring gasoline over my hood changed the dynamic entirely. She was no longer just an opportunistic sister inheriting an empire. She was legally an accessory after the fact to premeditated first-degree murder. Kendra called Preston less than a minute after opening the email. The audio feed crackled as Preston snatched up his office phone. "Who sent this?" Kendra shrieked, her voice stripped of all its usual polished elegance. Her tone was pure, unfiltered terror. "Maya is dead." The car burned to the frame. "Who the hell has this picture?" "I do not know," Preston roared back, his voice cracking under the strain. "Stop screaming at me. I am handling it. Do not reply to the email. Do not forward it to anyone. Do not even look at it again." "Are you insane?" Kendra sobbed. "We are going to prison. Whoever sent this is going to take it to the police. We need to cancel the gala. We need to liquidate whatever cash is left in the accounts and get out of the country tonight. We cannot touch the cash because you and your idiot friends triggered a federal fraud lockdown." Preston spat, shifting the blame with the ease of a true narcissist. "And we cannot run. If we run, we look guilty. If we cancel the memorial gala tomorrow night without a valid reason, the investors will demand an audit, and the FBI will start digging into the accident report. We have to stay exactly where we are." Preston slammed the phone down, ending the call. He was terrified, but his instinct for self-preservation overrode his panic. He locked the boardroom doors and pulled out a burner phone he kept in his briefcase. He dialed a number he had not used since his days as a ruthless corporate raider on Wall Street. He reached out to a shadow tech consultant, a digital mercenary who specialized in scrubbing corporate crimes and tracing anonymous blackmailers. "I will pay you $50,000 right now," Preston demanded. The second the mercenary answered the phone. "I just received an encrypted email with an attachment. I need you to trace the IP address. I need the exact physical location of the sender, and I need it in the next 20 minutes. I smiled, turning my head to look at Malik. Malik gave me a slow, confident nod. We had anticipated Preston making exactly this move. Malik was one of the premier digital architects in the country. He had not just hidden our location, he had intentionally weaponized the digital breadcrumbs. He had bounced the IP address through servers in Russia, Brazil, and Switzerland, but he purposefully anchored the final traceable ping to a very specific localized network. We sat in silence, listening to Preston pace the boardroom for exactly 18 minutes. Finally, the burner phone rang. Preston snatched it up. "Did you find them?" Preston demanded, his voice tight with anticipation. "Give me an address. I am going to handle this myself." The tech mercenary hesitated on the other end of the line. The arrogance was completely gone from the hacker voice, replaced by genuine unease. "I cracked the proxy layers," the mercenary said, his voice shaking slightly. "But you are not going to like what I found. The encryption is military grade, but the final beacon is anchored to a physical router on a secured private network." "Where is it?" Preston barked. "The ping is originating from downtown Atlanta," the expert replied. "The exact address is the Grand Plaza Hotel. It is coming directly from the localized router inside their main ballroom." Preston stopped pacing. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The color completely drained from his face. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom was the exact venue Preston had booked for the memorial and relaunch gala. The room where he planned to stand in front of the international press, mourn my tragic death and steal my legacy, was the exact room where his blackmailer was currently waiting. Whoever had the footage of him burning his wife alive was not hiding in the shadows. They were sitting right in the middle of his own party venue holding the detonator. Preston slowly lowered the phone from his ear. He was trapped. He could not cancel the gala without immediately triggering a massive federal investigation into his corporate takeover and the accident itself. He could not run without a single dollar of liquid capital. He had absolutely no choice but to put on a custom-tailored tuxedo, walk into that ballroom tomorrow night, and smile for the cameras, knowing perfectly well that he was stepping directly into a slaughterhouse. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom was a masterclass in performative grief wrapped tightly in corporate greed. Massive multi-tiered crystal chandeliers cast a cold, brilliant light over 500 of Atlanta's most powerful and influential figures. Mayors, tech investors, beauty industry moguls, and Wall Street vultures in custom-tailored tuxedos mingled effortlessly over crystal flutes of imported champagne. It was officially billed on the invitations as a memorial and relaunch gala, but everyone in the room knew the truth. It was a thinly veiled investor pitch, a bloodless corporate coronation designed to crown Preston as the undisputed king of my empire. I stood high above the glamorous charade, hidden in the pitch-black audio-visual control room suspended near the ceiling. The soundproof tinted glass gave me a godlike, omniscient view of the entire ballroom floor. Beside me, Malik was a symphony of calculated motion in the dark. His fingers danced across the glowing soundboard's complex video sequencers and master override switches. He had spent the last 3 hours completely hijacking the hotel internal network. We controlled the massive high-definition LED screens flanking the main stage. We controlled the surround sound speaker arrays positioned in every corner of the room. We controlled the narrative, and they had absolutely no idea. My eyes tracked a vibrant flash of emerald green silk moving smoothly through the sea of black and navy suits. Bernadette. My mother had clearly decided that traditional respectful mourning black was far too subdued for her grand return to high society. She was wearing a custom couture gown that caught the light with every step, holding court near a towering, intricately carved ice sculpture. She was performing the role of the devastated, grieving mother with a sickening, calculated precision. I watched her dab at completely dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, accepting the murmured condolences of a wealthy real estate developer before seamlessly reaching into her sequined clutch to hand him a glossy business card. She was actively leveraging her dead daughter to secure her next line of social credit and financial backing. The women from the megachurch who had rightfully humiliated her the previous Sunday were not invited to this exclusive, rarefied tier of wealth, which meant Bernadette felt entirely safe to reign supreme once again. Then the heavy oak double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open and Preston walked in. Even from 50 feet in the air, I could see the sheer, unadulterated terror radiating off his rigid body. He was wearing a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo tailored to perfection, but it hung on his frame like a straitjacket. His eyes darted wildly, scanning the faces of the servers carrying hors d'oeuvres, the stoic security guards lining the perimeter, and the wealthy guests holding their drinks. He knew the person who sent him that dashboard photograph of his attempted murder was inside this very building. The tech mercenary Digital Trace had confirmed it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Preston was a trapped rat surrounded by wealth and power, just waiting for the trap to snap shut on his neck. Kendra was trailing a few steps behind him, looking equally haunted and fragile. Her usual arrogant posture was gone. She jumped visibly every time a red carpet photographer flash went off near the entrance, her eyes wide and panicked. The so-called power couple of Melanin Crown looked less like triumphant corporate conquerors taking over an industry and more like condemned prisoners walking their final steps to the executioner block. They were completely paranoid, examining every shadow and every unfamiliar face in the room. But Preston was nothing if not a survivor fueled by pure unyielding narcissism. When the event coordinator approached him and signaled that it was time to begin the formal presentation, Preston took a deep, shuddering breath. He violently adjusted his cuffs, smoothed his lapels, and forced his signature polished Ivy League smile onto his face. He walked toward the main stage with purposeful strides, projecting the perfect illusion of a brave mourning husband, ready to carry the heavy torch forward. He stepped up to the clear acrylic podium positioned at the center of the stage. The lighting technician, completely unaware that Malik had already bypassed his controls, signaled for the house lights to shift. The chandeliers dimmed to a soft glow, and a crisp white spotlight cut through the darkness, landing directly on Preston. Behind him, the massive 30-foot-high digital screens illuminated the room. They displayed a stunning, larger-than-life portrait of my face. In the image, I looked radiant, powerful, and completely oblivious to the treacherous man standing beneath my chin. Preston tapped the microphone twice, the sound echoing sharply through the cavernous space. "Thank you all for being here with us tonight." Preston began, his voice smooth, practiced, and hitting the absolute perfect melancholic register. He was acting his heart out, relying on years of corporate presentations to mask his underlying panic. "We are gathered in this beautiful space, not just to mourn a profound, devastating loss, but to celebrate a monumental, enduring legacy." Maya was a visionary in every sense of the word. She built Melanin Crown from the ground up, pouring her brilliant soul, her unmatched creativity, and her fierce dedication into every product and every promise. I gripped the cool metal edge of the soundboard console tightly. Hearing my name rolling off his tongue wrapped in his counterfeit grief and hollow praise made my blood run entirely cold. It took every ounce of discipline I possessed not to shatter the glass separating us right then and there. Losing her was the darkest, most agonizing moment of my entire life. Preston continued placing a theatrical hand directly over his heart. He blinked rapidly, and I watched as he actually managed to produce a single gleaming tear that caught the stage spotlight perfectly as it rolled down his cheek. But in the difficult, quiet days following that tragedy, I realized I had a profound, unshakable duty. Maya would not want us to falter in the face of adversity. She would not want her life work to fade away. She would want her vision to evolve to reach new, unprecedented heights and to embrace a truly global standard of corporate excellence. That is why I made the difficult decision to step up and take the helm. I am fully committed to saving this company, to guiding it through the current supply chain storms, and to ensuring that Melanin Crown becomes a larger, more universally recognized, and more profitable brand than she ever dared to dream. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of his lies was breathtaking. He was standing in front of 500 elite guests, claiming to be my noble savior, while actively plotting to strip my company of its cultural identity, bankrupt my loyal suppliers, and replace my sacred organic formulas with cheap toxic chemicals. He was leveraging my supposed horrific death in a fiery car crash to validate his hostile financial takeover. The wealthy investors seated in the front row were nodding in solemn, respectful approval, completely captivated by his masterful performance. Bernadette was dabbing her eyes emphatically from the center VIP table, playing the role of the supportive, grieving mother-in-law to absolute perfection. Preston gripped the polished edges of the podium, tightly leaning into the microphone for his grand emotional finale. His eyes did one final rapid paranoid sweep of the darkened ballroom, desperately searching for any sign of a threat before settling back on the attentive crowd. To honor her incredible memory and to honor the brilliant, irreplaceable woman who started it all, I ask everyone in this room to please bow your heads, Preston said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. Let us share a moment of absolute, unbroken silence for my beautiful, beloved wife, Maya Washington. The entire grand ballroom fell completely, instantly silent. 500 heads bowed in perfect, respectful unison. The only sound in the massive space was the faint, steady hum of the industrial air conditioning system and the slight rustle of expensive fabric. Up in the pitch black, a V booth. Malik's fingers hovered steadily over the master control switch. He looked over at me, the digital glow of the security monitors reflecting sharply in his glasses. A slow, dangerous, and incredibly satisfying smile spread across his face. He flipped the heavy master override switch upward with a sharp click, completely and permanently locking the hotel staff out of their own audio and visual systems. He reached across the console and handed me the heavy broadcast quality microphone. Showtime! I gripped the heavy broadcast quality microphone Malik handed me. The metal was cool against my palm, grounding me in the reality of the moment. I did not speak into it right away. Instead, I reached across the illuminated soundboard and pressed my hand down flat against the master blackout switch. The transition was violently instantaneous. The grand ballroom was plunged into absolute impenetrable darkness. The massive crystal chandeliers hovering over the crowd died in a fraction of a second. The collective gasp that ripped through the room was a physical wave of sound, 500 elite guests suddenly stripped of their manufactured comfort and thrust into a suffocating vacuum of confusion. Down on the floor, the polite murmurs and the clinking of imported crystal vanished. The moment of silence Preston had so beautifully orchestrated morphed into a genuine, terrifying paralysis. They were just people standing in the dark, waiting for a ghost to speak. I gave Malik a single sharp nod. His fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the final security firewalls of the hotel network. He slid the primary fader all the way to the top. The massive 30-foot-high LED screens flanking the main stage did not gently fade into a tasteful sepia-toned memorial montage as the event coordinator had planned. They snapped to life with a blinding, harsh glare that cast sick white shadows over the faces of the investors in the front row. It was the raw, unedited dashcam footage. The high-definition camera angle was low looking up from the crushed spider-webbed dashboard of my imported SUV. The digital timestamp glowing bright red in the bottom corner established the exact night, the exact hour, and the exact minute Preston had pronounced me dead. The state-of-the-art surround sound system, usually reserved for delicate string quartets or polished corporate sizzle reels, crackled to life. The audio was devastatingly clear. It filled the cavernous ballroom with the deafening crunch of twisted metal, the agonizing screech of buckling steel, and the violent hiss of a ruptured radiator leaking onto hot asphalt. The ballroom was completely paralyzed. No one breathed. On the towering screens, Preston stepped into the frame. He was not running toward the wreckage to save his beloved wife. He was not pulling his phone from his pocket to call an ambulance. He was walking with a slow, calculated deliberation. The 500 guests watched in stunned, absolute horror as the man who had just delivered a tear-jerking eulogy casually walked to the trunk of the wrecked vehicle and returned holding a bright red plastic gasoline can. A woman in the third row let out a sharp, involuntary shriek, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room. The delicate sound of a crystal champagne flute slipping from a paralyzed hand and shattering against the marble floor echoed sharply. Then another dropped, and another. The visual evidence was damning enough to destroy him, but Malik had prepared a special catastrophic audio overlay for the occasion. During our weeks hiding in the shadows, Malik had not just tapped their current phones, he had hacked the archived carrier data, retrieving the deleted voicemails and the frantic encrypted calls made in the hours immediately following my crash. The audio fed through the massive speakers, booming with terrifying, undeniable clarity. It was a phone call. Preston, frantic voice breathing heavily, telling Bernadette that the deed was done, that the car was off the road, that I was trapped inside and bleeding. And then came my mother voice. Not the polished, sanctimonious tone of the megachurch matriarch, but the cold, calculating, reptilian voice of the monster she truly was. "Leave her there," Bernadette recorded voice, hissed through the ballroom, the sound vibrating violently against the crystal chandeliers above. "Do not call anyone Preston. Empty the can. When the flames die, so will every trace of you." The reaction in the room was nothing short of catastrophic. The entire front section of the audience, composed of Wall Street bankers, international beauty moguls, and high-profile politicians, physically recoiled. People scrambled backward, knocking over gold-plated Chiavari chairs in their desperate, frantic need to get away from the stage. The elegant facade of the relaunch gala violently disintegrated into a scene of pure, unadulterated panic. I shifted my gaze to the center VIP table. Bernadette was frozen in her chair, her face drained of all color, her jaw hanging slack in a mask of absolute terror. The wealthy real estate developer she had just handed a business card to looked at her with pure, unfiltered disgust. He threw the card onto the table like it was diseased, turning on his heel and fast walking toward the exit. The women in the surrounding chairs physically pulled away from her, gathering their silk gowns to avoid touching her. She was completely, irreparably ruined. Her own voice had just confessed to conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. The social kingdom she had sold my life to protect was crumbling into dust around her perfectly manicured feet. Down on the stage, Preston looked like a man tied to the tracks watching a freight train bear down on him. The sheer naked terror in his eyes was a magnificent reward. He spun around, staring up at his own glowing 30-foot magnified face on the screen behind him, watching himself unscrew the cap of the gasoline can. The fire reflected in his digital eyes, mirroring the complete, absolute destruction of his life in the physical world. He clawed at the earpiece tucked into his tuxedo collar, his perfectly groomed hair falling into his face. "Cut the feed!" Preston roared, his voice cracking with pure animalistic panic. He sounded nothing like a visionary CEO. He sounded like a cornered rat screaming for its life. He waved his arms wildly at the darkened corners of the room. "Security! Get up to the booth! Cut the main power! Shut it down right now!" But the security guards lining the perimeter of the ballroom were not moving to help him. They were staring at the screens, completely horrified by the brutal crime unfolding above them. Some were already reaching for their radios to call the actual police, and even if they had moved, it would not have mattered. Malik had severed the physical connection between the AV booth and the hotel main breaker hours ago. We were running on isolated, encrypted backup generators. Preston was entirely trapped inside his own digital execution. The footage looped seamlessly, playing the heavy splash of gasoline against my windshield and the horrific damning snap of his silver lighter over and over again, set to the relentless soundtrack of my murderous instructions. The air in the ballroom felt thick, poisoned by the undeniable reality of what they were witnessing. Preston scrambled off the clear acrylic podium, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the polished stage floor. He nearly tripped over the microphone stand, his eyes darting wildly toward the side exits. He was calculating his escape route, desperate to flee the room, desperate to run, before the initial shock wore off, and the wealthy crowd turned into an angry mob. He took one frantic step toward the edge of the stage, his chest heaving, his hands slick with cold sweat. But before he could take a single step down the carpeted stairs, before he could even process the full magnitude of his complete destruction, the heavy oak double doors at the absolute back of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding, thunderous crash. The heavy oak double doors at the absolute back of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding, thunderous crash. The heavy thud of solid wood striking the marble walls severed the suffocating tension in the room like a physical blade. The ambient light from the hallway spilled across the darkened floor, casting a long, sharp silhouette down the center aisle. I stepped into the light. I was wearing a striking, custom-tailored emerald green silk gown. The rich fabric caught the ambient glow of the massive digital screens, still looping my attempted murder above the stage. I wore no bandages. I wore no heavy concealing makeup. The healing burn scars traversing my collarbone and the jagged pink lacerations climbing the side of my neck were completely exposed. I wore them not as a tragedy, but as a crown of survival. They were the undeniable physical proof of my resurrection. The crowd of 500 elite investors, politicians, and beauty industry titans parted for me in absolute terrified silence. They pressed themselves against the banquet tables, knocking over crystal glasses and silver centerpieces in their desperate haste to clear a path. No one spoke. No one breathed. They were staring at a ghost who had clawed her way out of the ashes to crash her own funeral. The rhythmic, sharp click of my emerald heels against the marble floor echoed through the cavernous space. As I approached the center VIP section, Bernadette finally registered my presence. She looked up from her seat, her eyes bulging so wide the whites showed all the way around her irises. The color drained from her face, leaving her complexion an ashen, sickly gray. She let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek that scraped against the high ceilings of the ballroom. Desperate to deflect the catastrophic reality of the situation, she threw her arms in the air and executed a flawless, theatrical fainting spell, collapsing backward out of her chair and hitting the carpeted floor in a heap of designer fabric. I did not break my stride. I did not even look down. I stepped directly over her trembling, prone body, leaving my mother to cower on the floor in her own pathetic humiliation. Kendra was standing near the front of the stage, hyperventilating. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking violently as she frantically backed away from my approach. She spun around to face the cluster of wealthy international investors huddled near the front row. "Do not look at her!" Kendra screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "It is a trick. It is a deep fake. It is a highly sophisticated hologram. My sister is dead. That is an imposter hired to ruin us." The investors simply stared at her with open, visceral disgust. They had just listened to her mother order her husband to burn me alive on the surround sound speakers. Kendra's frantic denial only made her look dangerously unhinged. Preston finally snapped out of his paralyzed stupor. The realization that I was alive, that I possessed the evidence, and that I had orchestrated his complete public destruction shattered his carefully cultivated corporate facade. His survival instinct mutated into raw, unadulterated violence. His face contorted with rage, the veins in his neck bulging against his soaked tuxedo collar. He let out a guttural roar and lunged forward off the edge of the stage, his hands outstretched, intending to grab my throat and silence me right there in front of the press. He never made it past the first step. Malik stepped out from the shadows of the crowd with fluid predatory speed. Simultaneously, four men wearing dark, impeccably tailored suits and earpieces materialized from the perimeter of the room. They were federal agents from the Financial Crimes Task Force, and they moved with absolute uncompromising force. Two of the agents intercepted Preston mid-lunge, grabbing his arms and driving him backward with enough momentum that his spine slammed hard against the edge of the acrylic podium. They pinned him there, effectively neutralizing the great visionary CEO into a struggling, breathless captive. I ascended the carpeted stairs to the main stage. The air up here felt different. It was the summit of the mountain I had been climbing since the moment I woke up in that hospital bed, smelling of smoke and gasoline. I walked directly up to Preston. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving against the federal agent's grip, staring at me with a mixture of absolute hatred and paralyzing dread. I reached out and smoothly took the microphone from his shaking, clammy hand. I turned my back to him, facing the sea of shocked, silent faces in the ballroom. "You did not steal an empire." "Preston," I said, my voice echoing crisp and clear through the state-of-the-art sound system. I looked directly over my shoulder, meeting his manic eyes. "You stole a decoy." I turned back to the crowd and gestured to the massive digital screens behind me. Malik, currently standing near the edge of the stage, tapped a command into his tablet. The horrific dashcam footage vanished instantly, replaced by high-resolution images of financial documents, banking ledgers, and global supply chain manifests. To our esteemed investors, the members of the press, and the loyal distributors in the room tonight, I apologize for the dramatic nature of this evening. I announced, my voice steady, projecting absolute authority. But it was necessary to demonstrate exactly who is attempting to solicit your capital. The man standing behind me. Preston Shaw invited you here tonight to pitch you on the global expansion of Melanin Crown. He sold you a vision of aggressive restructuring and massive profit margins. But what he failed to disclose is that the company he currently controls is entirely bankrupt. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd of investors. I saw several high-profile bankers pulling out their phones, frantically typing messages to their risk management teams. Over the past 4 weeks, I continued pacing the stage with a calm, measured rhythm. I legally transferred every single patent, every proprietary organic formula, and every exclusive supplier contract out of the Melanin Crown corporate structure. I moved the entirety of the brand True Value into an independent holding company completely beyond Preston legal reach. He currently holds the title of CEO to an empty, hollow shell carrying millions of dollars in outstanding operational debt. Preston thrashed against the agents holding him. "That is a lie," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "She is lying. I have the corporate accounts. I control the supply chain." I turned to him, offering a cold, razor-sharp smile. "You controlled a supply chain of synthetic toxic chemicals that you ordered to replace my organic ingredients. You tried to poison my customer base to widen your profit margins. But those chemicals never reached the factory, did they, Preston? I rerouted your entire international freight shipment to a sub-zero commercial storage facility in Anchorage, Alaska. Your cheap synthetic fillers are currently frozen solid and completely ruined. Your Atlanta manufacturing plant has been sitting entirely dead, burning through thousands of dollars of overtime pay every single hour while waiting for raw materials that will never arrive." I looked back at the crowd, my voice rising in power. "But corporate sabotage is not why these federal agents are standing on my stage. 3 days ago, desperate to fund this fraudulent gala and mask his bleeding supply chain, Preston executed a massive capital transfer. He wired $5 million from the company primary operational fund directly to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." The murmurs in the crowd evolved into loud, angry shouts. Defrauding investors was the ultimate sin in this room. He authorized that massive transfer using a forged power of attorney document, I stated, pointing directly at Preston. He claimed I signed it, granting him absolute financial control just hours before my tragic accident. He committed federal wire fraud across international lines to steal capital he thought I was too dead to protect. Preston suddenly stopped struggling. the fight completely drained out of his body. His knees buckled slightly, and the federal agents had to haul him upright by his armpits. The reality of his situation had finally pierced his towering arrogance. He was not just facing public humiliation. He was facing decades in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and attempted murder. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for a lifeline, an excuse, a scapegoat. His gaze landed on Kendra, who was standing frozen near the front row, watching her entire life disintegrate. Preston completely snapped. The polished, calculated Wall Street shark vanished, replaced by a desperate, cowardly man, eager to save his own skin. "She made me do it!" Preston screamed, his voice echoing violently through the ballroom. He raised a shaking finger and pointed directly at his wife. She wanted the money. She hated Maya. She provided the forged signature for the bank transfers. It was her plan to hollow out the accounts before the board realized the company was failing. I was just following her directives. Kendra's face contorted with absolute rage. The accusation shattered whatever fragile composure she had left. She shrieked a sound of pure venomous betrayal and lunged forward. She grabbed the edge of the stage, attempting to pull herself up to physically attack him. "You pathetic coward," Kendra screamed, her voice cracking as she clawed at the air toward his face. "You poured the gasoline. You struck the lighter. You told me she was trapped inside. And I am not taking the fall for this alone." Kendra spun around, her wild eyes searching the floor until she spotted Bernadette. My mother had managed to sit up from her fake fainting spell and was currently trying to crawl backward toward the exit, desperately attempting to flee the blast radius of her own family. "It was her idea," Kendra roared, pointing directly at our mother. "Bernadette told us to do it. She told Preston to leave Maya in the car. She said the insurance payout and the corporate control would secure our legacy. She orchestrated the entire thing." Bernadette froze on her hands and knees. She looked up at the circle of disgusted, wealthy investors staring down at her. "Shut your mouth, you stupid, ungrateful child!" Bernadette shrieked back, completely abandoning her refined Southern belle persona. "I gave you everything. I built this family. You were too incompetent to run the company without me pulling the strings." The perfect, untouchable family had completely deteriorated into a pack of cornered, starving rats. They were screaming, cursing, and tearing each other apart in front of the city's most elite figures. The wealthy crowd watched in absolute silence, paralyzed by the sheer, horrific spectacle of their mutual destruction. They were airing every dirty secret, every ounce of greed, and every drop of hatred they harbored for one another, doing the prosecution job for them, right there on the ballroom floor. I stood silently at the podium watching the carnage unfold. I had not needed to raise a hand against them. I simply built the trap, laid out the bait, and let their own boundless greed snap the jaws shut. The lead federal agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern, uncompromising expression, stepped forward from the shadows. He signaled to the agents holding Preston, and they forcefully spun the CEO around, kicking his legs apart and slamming his hands behind his back. The sharp, heavy click of metal handcuffs ratcheting tight echoed through the microphone. Down on the floor, two more agents moved in on Kendra, ignoring her hysterical thrashing as they secured her wrists. Another agent stood over Bernadette, hauling her up from the carpet by her arms. "Preston Shaw, Kendra Shaw." "Bernadette Washington," the lead agent announced, his deep voice cutting cleanly through the chaotic screaming of the family. "You are all under arrest." The heavy steel cuffs clicked shut, the sound cutting through the stunned silence of the grand ballroom like the final strike of a gavel. The lead federal agent jerked Preston backward, forcing him to walk. The rest of the agents hauled Kendra and Bernadette to their feet, their designer gowns dragging pitifully against the marble floor. Preston had meticulously orchestrated this evening to be his ultimate coronation. He had invited every major local news network, every elite business publication, and every high society photographer in Atlanta to document his ascent. Now, as the agents marched the three of them down the center aisle, that exact media presence became their executioner. The ballroom double doors were propped wide open, and the flashing strobes of 50 different cameras instantly blinded them. The reporters Preston had carefully positioned in the foyer surged forward, shoving microphones past the velvet ropes. The questions rained down in a deafening crossfire, asking about the wire fraud, the forged documents, and the attempted murder they had all just witnessed on the 30-foot digital screens. Preston kept his head down, his face flushed a mottled, apoplectic red. His jaw clamped so tight a muscle ticked furiously in his cheek. He was completely broken. Kendra was sobbing hysterically, her mascara running in thick, dark streaks down her face, screaming at the cameras to stop recording her. But Bernadette could not accept the reality of her kingdom collapsing. As an agent dragged her past the podium where I stood, her knees suddenly buckled. She threw herself onto the carpet, the emerald green silk of her custom couture gown pooling around her in a pathetic display of manufactured vulnerability. She craned her neck, looking up at me with tears streaming down her carefully lifted face. "Maya, please," Bernadette wailed, her voice cracking with the exact same dramatic pitch she used during her church testimonials. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot send your own family to prison. Drop the charges. Please, baby. We are blood. Think of the Sunday dinners. Think of your father. We are blood." The entire ballroom watched, waiting for my reaction. For 30 years, that specific tone of voice had been my command to fall in line, to shrink myself, to apologize for breathing the same air as my perfect sister. But looking down at her now, kneeling on the floor in her expensive gown, I felt absolutely nothing. The well of daughterly obligation had burned completely dry. I looked down at her, entirely devoid of emotion. "You should have raised a better daughter, Mom," I said coldly, my voice carrying clearly over the chaos. "Or at least married off the one you loved to a better criminal." I did not wait for her response. I turned my back as the agents hauled her forcefully to her feet, dragging her out the double doors as she shrieked my name. The flashing camera lights illuminated their terrified faces one last time before the heavy doors swung shut behind them. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers strobed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the hotel lobby, accompanied by the rising wail of sirens. The show was over. The trap had sprung, but there was still one loose end to tie. Near the far wall of the ballroom, slipping silently behind the massive ice sculpture, the VP of Operations was making a desperate break for the service exit. She was the insider who had fed Preston the supply chain schedules, the trader who had authorized the synthetic chemical shipments in exchange for a massive offshore bonus. She reached out her hand, trembling, as she pushed the emergency exit bar. Before the door could swing open, a large hand clamped down over hers, forcing the metal bar back into place. Malik stepped out of the service corridor, shadows, his face a mask of absolute calm. The VP gasped, stumbling backward until her spine hit the wall. "Going somewhere?" Valerie Malik asked smoothly. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. He held it out to her. She stared at it like it was a live grenade, her hands shaking too badly to take it. Malik calmly tucked the envelope into the folds of her expensive clutch. "That is your formal termination letter, effective retroactively to the moment you authorize the chemical substitution," Malik stated, his voice ringing with legal authority. "And tucked right behind it is a federal subpoena. The task force investigating Preston wire fraud is very interested in your offshore accounts. Corporate espionage carries a mandatory minimum sentence. I suggest you call a very good lawyer." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the exit. The VP let out a choked sob, clutching her purse to her chest, and bolted through the doors into the rainy Atlanta night. 3 months later, the ashes of my former life had completely settled. The legal and social destruction of my family was thorough, relentless, and brutally public. Preston high-priced defense attorneys tried to orchestrate a plea deal, but the sheer volume of evidence we handed the federal prosecutors made any leniency impossible. The unedited dashcam footage played on a continuous loop during his trial. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Preston was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for attempted murder, aggravated arson, and international wire fraud. The judge explicitly noted his absolute lack of remorse during sentencing. Kendra's fate was equally devastating. Her prestigious medical license was revoked permanently the moment the fraud charges were filed. Without Preston's stolen money to protect her, her expensive defense crumbled. She faced 15 years in a federal women facility as a direct accessory after the fact, charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aiding in the attempted cover-up of my murder. Bernadette lost the only thing she truly cared about. Her sprawling, perfectly decorated suburban mansion was seized and foreclosed on by the bank to cover the massive legal debts her family accumulated. Her social standing at the megachurch was instantly obliterated. The same women who had once hung on her every word voted unanimously to expel her from the congregation. She was currently being held in the county facility, awaiting her own trial for conspiracy, facing a mandatory minimum of 5 years. I visited the county holding facility exactly one time before their scheduled transfers to the federal penitentiary. I did not go to gloat. I did not go to demand apologies or seek explanations. I went for absolute, uncompromising closure. I sat in the sterile, heavily guarded visitor room, separated from Kendra by a thick pane of reinforced, smudge-proof glass. She looked completely unrecognizable. The designer clothes and perfectly blown-out hair were gone, replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit and dull, unwashed roots. The arrogant light in her eyes had been extinguished, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, venomous resentment. She picked up the heavy black telephone receiver on her side of the glass. Her hand was shaking. She did not say hello. She did not apologize for helping her husband plan my cremation. "Why did you not just die?" Kendra asked, her voice cracking with a bitter, toxic hatred that chilled the air in the tiny booth. "Everything would have been perfect if you had just burned. We deserved that money. I deserved that life. You were always just in the way." I held the receiver to my ear, listening to the pure malice pouring out of my sister's mouth. For my entire life, I had contorted myself to fit into their mold. I had accepted their cruelty, internalized their rejection, and begged for their validation. I had believed on some fundamental level that if I just worked harder, built more, and gave them enough, they would eventually love me. Looking at her now trapped in a cinderblock room of her own making, I realized the absolute truth. She would never change. None of them would. They were broken, empty vessels incapable of love. And the anger I had carried in my chest for 30 years simply evaporated. It dissolved into pure, chilling apathy. I did not answer her question. I simply placed the heavy black receiver back onto the metal cradle, cutting off the sound of her voice mid-sentence. I stood up, smoothed the skirt of my dress, and walked out of the visitor room without looking back. I walked through the heavy sliding steel doors of the prison and stepped out into the bright, warm Atlanta sunlight. The air tasted incredibly sweet. The invisible, suffocating chains of seeking their toxic validation had finally permanently snapped. I was entirely free. The official public launch of Onyx Crown Holdings took place on the rooftop terrace of my newly acquired penthouse. It was not a stuffy corporate ballroom affair filled with vipers and opportunists. It was an intimate, fiercely protected celebration of survival and rebirth. Onyx Crown was bigger, stronger, and infinitely more profitable than Melanin Crown had ever been. By stripping the company of my family toxic influence, I had streamlined the supply chain, doubled the organic farming contracts, and secured distribution deals that placed our products in luxury boutiques across 3 continents. The brand was completely untainted by their shadows. It belonged solely to me. I stood on the edge of the sprawling glass balcony, the city skyline glittering below me like a bed of crushed diamonds. The night air was warm, carrying the faint sound of jazz playing from the terrace behind me. Malik stepped up to the railing, handing me a crystal flute of vintage champagne. He was wearing a custom navy suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. That morning, his law firm had officially made him a named partner, recognizing the brilliant, flawless legal maneuvering he had executed to protect my assets and secure my holding company. He clinked his glass gently against mine. To the architect, Malik said, his dark eyes shining with genuine pride and unwavering respect. I smiled, taking a slow sip of the crisp champagne. I was no longer the family scapegoat. I was no longer the college dropout who had to beg for a seat at the table. I was no longer the invisible sister, striving for scraps of affection from a mother who despised me. I was the sole, untouchable architect of my own extraordinary life. I looked out over the sprawling city, feeling the smooth, healing scars on my collarbone shift beneath my silk dress. They thought fire would erase me, I said softly, the words carrying clearly into the night air. They forgot that fire doesn't destroy gold. It only melts away the impurities. And my life finally is flawlessly pure. The ultimate lesson from this story is that your true worth is never defined by the toxic people who try to break you. When family members or partners view you as a disposable stepping stone for their own greed, their betrayal is a reflection of their emptiness, not your inadequacy. You do not need to seek validation from those who fundamentally misunderstand your value. Instead, use their underestimation as your fuel to silently build your own unshakable empire. Sometimes the most profound justice doesn't come from vengeance, but from walking away, reclaiming your power, and letting their malice destroy them. Share your story in the comments below if you have ever found the courage to turn a painful betrayal into your greatest success.